Hey guys! Tonight, we saddle up on the open steppe. Wind in your hair, cold in your lungs. The taste of horse sweat and mutton in the air. The grass sways in golden waves, and the world feels endless. Just you, your mount, and a bow slung across your back. You're not some pampered prince. You're a half-starved boy, clutching to the ragged edge of survival, with enemies behind every hill and loyalty as thin as smoke. In the shadows of tribal warfare and shattered alliances, a child named Temujin begins his impossible climb toward becoming the most feared warlord the world has ever known. Oh, and spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this. Mongol life expectancy back then was something like, until your cousin betrays you over a yak. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're born in the harsh, raw-throated wind of the Mongolian steppe. No soft lullabies, just the hiss of icy gales through the grass and the occasional wail of wolves. Your cradle, a rough blanket in a tent made of felt. Your lullaby, the scraping sounds of your mother preparing dried meat and mare's milk in a cauldron that's never truly clean. You are Temujin, not yet Genghis. That comes much later. Right now, you're just a boy with a famous name and not much else. You're born in 1162, or maybe 1167. No one's quite sure. Even historians still argue whether Temujin's birth happened during a celestial event or just a nasty snowstorm. Either way, the sky was doing something dramatic. Your father, Yasuge, is a big deal in a small world. A tribal chieftain, but not a Khan of Khans. He names you after a Tatar enemy he'd just killed. Classic steppe logic. Naming your child after the guy you decapitated for bragging rights. There's some hope you'll grow into something fearsome. But hope is expensive on the steppe. When you're 9, your father is poisoned by enemies. Yasuge had made the fatal mistake of eating without checking whose tent he walked into. Mongol hospitality is famous, sure, but so is Mongol betrayal. Poison is a favorite seasoning. Now you're just a boy with 4 brothers, a mother scraping to keep you alive, and no tribe to protect you. Because after Yasuge dies, the clan he led abandons your family like yesterday's goat bones. Exiled, left to starve. Welcome to the school of hardship. Population, you and your siblings. You learn hunger like it's a second language. You trap mice. You eat roots. Sometimes, when it gets desperate, you eat things that don't deserve names. Once, your brother steals food, and you kill him for it. No ceremony. Just a rock and a moment. Mongol life isn't sentimental. Resources are precious, and weakness is a threat. In a weird, brutal way. That's where the future army begins. Not with banners or war drums, but with one boy deciding he'll do anything, absolutely anything, to never be powerless again. Temujin isn't charismatic yet. Not really, but he understands something. Even grown men don't. You don't need to be the biggest to lead. You just need to know what other people fear, and how to promise them they won't have to fear it if they follow you. So you begin gathering allies the only way you can, through marriage, blood oaths, and the occasional shared grudge. You marry Berta, who's smarter than most men you'll ever meet. Her family is politically useful, but that's not why she matters. She becomes the center of your small, growing world. When she's kidnapped by the Merkits, rival tribe, fond of horse theft and bride snatching, you go to war. And this isn't a big, cinematic campaign. It's your first taste of command. You gather allies, launch a raid, and get her back. It's a small rescue, but symbolically, it's huge. You don't abandon your own. The men watching you learn that. That's your first principle of leadership. Loyalty must be louder than fear. You start building a crew, the Anda, the sworn brotherhood. Think of it like a romantic alliance. No shared blood, but deeper than blood. Most famously, you reconnect with Jamuka, your childhood friend. He's charming, connected, popular, the guy everyone assumes will rule. You two hunt together, ride together, even share the same saddle at one point. Mongol bromance at its peak, but of course, this is history, so you probably already guessed. It's going to end in flaming betrayal and open war. The politics of the steppe are like a pack of wolves, shifting, snarling, and quick to bite. Tribes form alliances, then betray each other faster than a horse can turn tail. If someone gives you a gift, you have to wonder, is it generosity or bait? And amid all that chaos, you start realizing something. The only way to rise above the blood feuds and backstabbing is to create a system stronger than family loyalty. You begin promoting people based not on blood, but on merit. Revolutionary stuff, really. Remember that guy who was born a slave, but fights like a thunderstorm? You give him a command. The guy with the busted eye who plans ambushes like a chess master. He gets a banner. You break all the steppe taboos, ignoring aristocracy, discarding favoritism. It's so disruptive that many tribes hate you for it. But the poor, the outcast, the ambitious, they flock to you like moths to a campfire, because you're building something that doesn't exist yet. A Mongol identity stronger than any clan name. One night, under the open sky, you make a blood pact with your closest allies. You slit your palms and mix blood into a ceremonial cup. No fancy temples, just earth, steel, and stars. This is the moment it becomes more than survival. You're going to conquer, maybe not the world, not yet, but your enemies? Definitely. And this is where it gets intense. Because Jamuka, remember him, your childhood bestie? He wants to rule too. And unlike you, he's sticking with the aristocrats, the blue bloods of the steppe. He thinks your merit-based system is a threat to tradition, so it happens. Brother against brother. Anda versus Anda. The first battle doesn't go well. Jamuka crushes you, literally. He captures your men, and according to a grim and still debated story, he boils 70 of your commanders alive. Yes, boils, like dumplings, but infinitely more horrifying. Historians still argue, whether that particular event really happened, or whether it was post-war propaganda designed to paint Jamuka as a monster. Either way, it leaves scars, emotional and strategic. You retreat, regroup, re-strategize. And here's the thing, most men would quit after that. Most leaders would become ex-leaders. But you see something different. Not just in your enemies, but in the gaps between them, the weaknesses, the friction between tribes, the fear of Jamuka's brutality. So, slowly, you start winning hearts, one tribe at a time, offering security, order, and a promise. Under your banner, no one gets boiled. You build relationships through ritual, gift-giving, and military collaboration. Every man who swears to you adds to something that hasn't existed before. An army not loyal to a tribe, but to a vision. By the time Jamuka comes back for round 2, you're ready. The second battle is the turning point. The steppe is thunder under hooves, arrows hissing through air. Your tactics, fluid, unpredictable, confuse his more rigid army. And when the dust settles, it's Jamuka who flees. You don't boil him. That's not your style. Instead, you offer mercy. And when your followers demand execution anyway, you grant it, but painlessly. Quick sword, clean death. Because the world you're building has rules. Your name now spreads far and wide. Temujin, the uniter, the strategist, the man who redefines what it means to be Mongol. But you're still not Genghis Khan. Not yet. That comes soon, when all the steppe gathers, from rivers to desert, and declares you the universal ruler, the Genghis Khan, the Khan of all Khans. Your face is calm when they chant your name, but inside, you already know. The steppe wasn't the goal. The world is next. You stand at the center of the steppe, wind tugging your sleeves, the scent of dried dung, fires clinging to your robe. The great assembly, the Kurultai, has spoken. Chiefs and warriors from every corner of the grasslands have banged the earth with their staffs and declared it official. You are now Genghis Khan, universal ruler. No more tribal squabbling. No more cousin-on-cousin backstabbing. Well, less of it anyway. The Mongols have become a single people with a single voice. And guess who's the guy holding the reins? You are. But don't think this means your troubles are over. Power on the steppe is about as stable as a goat on a frozen river. You've just climbed a blood-soaked mountain, and now you've got to keep it from collapsing beneath you. There's still no empire, just the bones of one. No borders, no cities, no coin. What you have is momentum and a deeply uncomfortable awareness that most of the men smiling at you during the ceremony would happily switch sides if the wind changed direction. Still, you're not some ceremonial Khan sitting on a pillow. You're riding constantly, holding war councils on horseback, eating in the saddle, planning in motion. Because out here, motion is survival. Let's rewind a little. After that second victory over Jamuka, After your strange mercy made its way across the steppe, your army began to snowball. You didn't win through brute force alone. You weaponized memory. People remembered your fairness, your battlefield discipline, the time you spared a village instead of wiping it out. That said, you also burned a lot of villages, just strategically. Your enemies were many: the Tatars, the Merkits, the Naimans, old rivals with old grudges. Each tribe had their own customs, their own language variations, their own pride. Uniting them under one banner? That wasn't diplomacy, it was choreographed war, and you danced it well. One of your greatest strengths? Talent recognition. You notice the quiet ones, the ones who calculate instead of boast. Like Subutai, a blacksmith's kid with no noble blood, but a brain wired like a siege engine. You bring him into your inner circle, and over time, he becomes the Mongol army's most ruthless general. Subutai never forgets anything. He maps rivers and mountain passes in his head, calculates distance in hooves per hour. You know the look he gets in his eyes before a big campaign. The look of someone deciding how many ways the wind can kill a man. Then there's Jebe. He literally earned his name by shooting you in the neck during a battle. He apologized, surrendered, and you promoted him. That's the Mongol way now. Skill over heritage. A guy with guts gets a chance. If he proves himself, he rides beside the Khan. If not, well, the steppe reclaims him. This way, you start building something rare. A loyal army of equals, not bickering nobles. It's also around this time you redefine the Mongol concept of warfare. Before you, tribal skirmishes were mostly quick raids, kidnappings, and revenge strikes. But you're thinking bigger. You tell your men, stop stealing women and cattle. Start capturing information. Who grows millet? Who controls the salt? Where's the water? How many fighting men are in that valley? You teach them that knowledge is a better weapon than a spear. And when your scouts bring you intel, you use it with cold, surgical precision. You start with the Tatars, old enemies. They killed your father, remember? Time to settle that tab. The attack is swift. Your horsemen ride through fog and grass at dawn, shouting war cries, flanking and feinting, arrows buzzing like bees. The Tatars crumble. You take the survivors, line them up, and execute every male taller than a cart axle. Brutal? Yes, but also classic Mongol measurement system. Then the Merkits. They once kidnapped Bertha, your wife. You've carried that memory like a blade in your ribs for years. When the time comes, your soldiers descend on the Merkit camp like a sandstorm with hooves. You wipe them out. No mercy this time. And the Naimans, wealthy, arrogant, confident they can outmaneuver you. They're wrong. At the Battle of the Irtish River, your army divides like a shadow, circling, teasing, drawing the Naimans into a trap, and then crunch, like a yurt under a stampede. You don't just beat them, you absorb them. Their engineers, scribes, and even their priests become yours. You're not just building an army now, you're building an infrastructure that includes tolerance. which is weird for a guy who leaves entire villages in smoking ruin. But it's true. You let conquered peoples keep their religions. You just insist they pay taxes and follow your laws. You've got Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, Tengri shamans, and probably a few confused fire worshippers in the ranks. You don't care what they believe. You care whether they can help you run a better army. One fringe anecdote suggests you even invited a Taoist sage to bless your campaign plans with cosmic harmony. Historians still argue whether that actually happened or if it was just an awkward team-building retreat. So, here you are, Genghis Khan, supreme commander of a force unlike anything the steppes have ever seen. And now you have to decide, where do you take this? The answer lies to the east, the Jin dynasty. The Jin control northern China, and they've been throwing their weight around the steppe for decades, taxing nomads, playing tribes against each other, building walls to keep people like you out. Plus, they supported your rivals during your rise. You never forget things like that, so you prepare for war. But not just any war, a revolution in warfare. You reorganize your army into units of 10, the decimal system. 10 men, 1 squad. 10 squads, 1 company. All the way up to 10,000, the 2 men. Each unit functions like a piece of a massive, lethal organism. They drill, they rotate commanders, they ride with the precision of arrows, and you create the Keshig, the Imperial Guard. Not just elite bodyguards. They're the glue that holds your command structure together. They also serve as your eyes and ears. If a general starts getting ideas, the Keshig already knows. Also, you're constantly experimenting with new signals and communication. Smoke, flags, horn calls. Your army isn't just fast, it's coordinated. And that's what terrifies your enemies most. You launch the campaign against the Jin with careful timing. In 1211, your forces cross into northern China, and you begin to test yourself against walls. The one thing steppe warriors have never been good at. So you get creative. You recruit defectors, engineers, who once served the Khitan or the Jin themselves. You copy Chinese siege technology. You haul catapults across deserts. One story claims your men once diverted a river to flood a city's walls. Another says you ordered flaming birds launched into a town's rooftops. One quirky detail: at Zhongdu, present-day Beijing, it's said you let enemy ambassadors go home safely after melting gold and pouring it down the throats of corrupt nobles. Scholars debate the truth of this grisly tale, but it shows how your legend evolves fast. Equal parts strategy and theater. Meanwhile, your troops are trained to adapt. They learn how to dig trenches, scale walls, even capture boats. Mongols on boats. The very concept makes your enemies laugh until those boats are on fire and floating straight into their docks. And while the Jin flail, you keep rotating generals. Subutai, Jebe, Jelme, Kublai's future mentors. Everyone gets a turn on the chessboard. The idea is simple. No one man becomes indispensable, except you, of course. But victory comes slow. The Jin are tough. Their walls are thick. Their crossbows lethal. You suffer losses. 1 year, disease and weather kill more men than arrows. And yet, you don't stop. You never stop. Because you've learned something deeper than strategy. The enemy expects you to quit, but you never do. That's what makes you terrifying. Eventually, after years of campaign and relentless pressure, the Jin court collapses into infighting. Their cities surrender one by one. You don't just win, you dismantle an entire dynasty. And you're not done, because behind the horizon lies more than just cities to burn. There are empires to break, and you've only just finished sharpening your blade. You wake with a frost on your eyelashes and the sound of horse hooves in your ears. It's always like this on the steppe. Wide sky, cold ground, and the breath of your mount steaming like a tiny cloud. Your saddle is your chair, your pillow, your strategy table. The Mongol army doesn't sleep in cities. It moves. And when it moves, the earth listens. You don't have a standing army in the traditional sense. No barracks, no parade drills under marble arches. Your army is a nation on horseback, and every adult male Mongol is part of it. From the moment a boy can hold a bow, he's training, riding, learning how to fall off a galloping horse, and land with style. You're not just building a fighting force. You're building a way of life. Let's talk about your training, because frankly, it's intense. By age 3, Mongol boys are riding sheep. By 5, they're on ponies. By 10, they can shoot a bird, mid-flight, while galloping full speed with their legs clamped to a horse's ribs like a vice grip. You learn to ride until it's second nature, so much so that Mongol warriors often sleep in the saddle on long marches, heads bowed like monks. Archery is your true religion. Your bow, a compact marvel of laminated horn, sinew, and wood, more powerful than anything Europe has seen yet. You can hit a target at 350 meters with terrifying consistency from a moving horse while turning in mid-air. You know, just to show off. And the quiver, it's strapped to your right side with arrows of varying lengths and heads, some for piercing armor, some for whistling, some for fire. You even carry dummy arrows to confuse your enemies in the middle of battle. That's the key. Confusion, deception, flexibility. A Mongol warrior doesn't charge in blind. He probes, retreats, draws you out, and then hits where you least expect. You've got no fixed formations, just small, agile units that move like a murmuration of birds. And it all starts with the horse. Ah, yes, the Mongol horse. Let's give that shaggy little beast its moment. They're not pretty. No flowing manes or glossy coats. They're short, tough, slightly grumpy animals with the temperament of a hungover goat. But they are indestructible. These horses can gallop for hours, survive on dry grass, and drink from frozen streams. If things get really bad, you cut a vein in their necks and drink the blood. Not enough to kill them, just a light snack. The horses barely notice. That's how bonded you are. Each warrior rides with 4 or 5 horses. You rotate mounts constantly, keeping them fresh. That means your army moves faster than anyone expects, covering distances in days that would take other forces weeks. And unlike most medieval armies, you carry no supply wagons. You bring everything you need on the horse: dried meat, fermented mare's milk, an acquired taste, bowstrings, tinder, even extra boots. When food runs low, you hunt. If that fails, well, remember that time someone grilled marmot on a shield. Not the best meal, but hey, it fills the stomach. A fringe detail: Mongol warriors were known to cut the throats of their own enemies and hang their intestines on the horns of their saddles as war trophies. Some historians argue this was ritual. Others say it was psychological warfare. Either way, it's the kind of thing that makes an impression. Then there's the culture of discipline. You've banned looting unless ordered. Disobedience gets punished fast and harsh, sometimes by execution, sometimes by being left behind with a broken horse and no water. And yet, desertion is almost non-existent. Why? Because Mongols don't fight for plunder. They fight for status, for honor, for the favor of the Khan. That's you. Remember? You've built something deeper than an army. You've built a brotherhood of killers who believe in the mission. And when your soldiers ride into battle, they sing low chants, rhythmic drumming on saddle horns, bone flutes blowing through the dust. It's not quite music. It's a message. We're here. But it's not all military drills and marmot kebabs. You've created a home front on horseback. The army is mobile, yes, but it includes women, children, and herds. Entire communities move with your forces. Like nomadic cities, warriors ride to battle in the morning and return to warm yurts and hot broth at night. Your wives handle logistics. Your daughters brew the kumis and maintain morale. One of your daughters, Alakai Beki, eventually governs entire regions. Another leads troops into battle. In Mongol society, women carry real authority. Not equality in a modern sense, but way ahead of the curve. For the 13th century, you don't have castles. You have gurs, circular tents made of felt and wood. Portable, tough, warm. Set up in under an hour. A good yurt can withstand a blizzard and be dragged behind a yak in the morning. The Mongol camp moves like clockwork, cooking fires in the center, horses tethered on the perimeter, children trained to pack and unpack quickly. When it's time to move, everything collapses and vanishes like a magician's trick. To your enemies, it looks like the army disappeared, but really, you're already miles away. Religion, too, is part of your world, but in a loose, flexible way. You follow Tengrism, the ancient belief system of the steppe. The sky god Tengri watches over you. The earth goddess Itugan grounds you. Shamanism, spirits, omens, all deeply woven into Mongol daily life. If a shaman says, don't attack on a Tuesday, well, maybe wait till Wednesday, but you don't enforce it. Your army includes Muslims, Buddhists, and Christians. There's even that time an Nestorian priest blessed your horses before a campaign in Central Asia. Weird, right? But in your mind, if it works, it works. Your tolerance has a logic. It keeps your forces unified. And more importantly, it lets you rule people who don't look or pray like you without them revolting every 5 minutes. Every now and then, you gather the men for a hunt. But this isn't your average ride into the forest and hope for a rabbit kind of hunt. This is the Nerge, a full-scale military simulation. Thousands of men ride in a massive circle for miles, driving every living animal into a central killing zone. It teaches coordination, discipline, restraint. Because if a warrior kills early, breaks formation, or lets an animal escape, he's punished like he botched a battle. One time, you had 20,000 men do a Nerge for weeks, pushing animals across entire regions. The final slaughter included boar, deer, fox, even a tiger. It was like a rolling zoo with arrows. Morbid? Yes, but effective. And that's the point. Everything is training. Even play is preparation. Even leisure is war. Now let's address one final piece. Strategy meetings. You don't sit on a throne. You squat in a circle. You listen more than you speak. When your generals offer ideas, you weigh each one carefully. Debate is open, honest, even brutal. Subutai once called your favorite plan the idea of a drunk camel. You laughed, and then you used his version instead, because you don't care who's right. You care who wins. That mindset seeps into every part of your army. It's why no one wants to leave. Even the conquered soldiers beg to join your forces. You offer them meat, protection, and a share of the loot if they survive. And many do, because by now, the Mongol army isn't just Mongol. It's Turkic, Persian, Chinese, even Russian in some cases. You're absorbing skills and bodies like a sponge. Archers from Central Asia, engineers from the Khitan, doctors from Baghdad. Each new piece clicks into the machine. You've created a modular empire on horseback. Fast, smart, deadly, and ready to roll across the world like a living thunderclap. So now, as the snow begins to melt, as spring grass tickles your horse's ankles, you look to the horizon, to the south, more Chinese cities, fat with gold and silks. To the west, caravans laden with spices, maps, and manuscripts. And beyond that, kingdoms, realms, empires that still laugh when they hear the name Genghis Khan. They won't be laughing much longer, because the storm is ready, and you are its eye. Your banner flaps high on the wind. 9 white yak tails, stiff and solemn, their meaning older than language. They whip in the breeze like a warning, whispering across the hills to every rival who still dares dream of power. The steppe is no longer yours. This is it. The moment Mongol history crystallizes, the clans are no longer scattered sparks. You have gathered them into a flame. A nation, in the truest sense of the word, though the world doesn't yet have the language to describe it. No borders, no fixed capital, just loyalty, law, and momentum. You stand at the front of your warriors, not behind them. Your armor is iron and leather, patched in places by your own hand. You wear a sash of bright silk, a sign of your new title. Your sword is curved, not for show, but for slicing downward from horseback with maximum efficiency. The hilt smells faintly of blood and sweat. Familiar, almost comforting. Behind you, tens of thousands of warriors. To your left, Subutai, stone-faced, calculating. To your right, Jebe, leaning on his bow, eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk. And above you, always, the eternal blue sky. Tengri, your divine witness. The Kurultai has declared you Genghis Khan, oceanic ruler, universal sovereign. But this isn't just a title, it's a mandate. You've been given the responsibility to unify all Mongol tribes under one banner, the 9 white banners, a sacred symbol of peace and conquest alike. They're not just decoration. They represent the eternal spirit of the Mongol people, a direct connection to the heavens. The tails are cleaned, blessed, raised on tall poles during ceremonies. They're only displayed in peacetime when the Khan is present, your personal aura made visible. For wartime, the banners are reversed. Black yak tails, soaked in blood and shadow, flapping like ghosts. They mean something very simple. No mercy today. This duality, white for unity, black for obliteration, is the soul of your army, gentle to its own, ruthless to the rest. You reorganize the military again, now on a national scale. Every man in the empire is registered into a unit. No more tribal favoritism. The decimal system rules all. Arban, 10, Zun, 100, Mingan, 1,000, Tumen, 10,000. Each unit has its own commander, often chosen by merit or voted on by the men, unless you override the decision, which you sometimes do when someone's cousin is obviously an idiot. And here's the genius twist. You mix the tribes. No more all Tatar or all Naiman units. You shuffle the deck. That way, loyalty to the Khan outweighs loyalty to blood. It's the ancient version of team building, with a bit more swordplay. This system changes everything. It builds trust between former enemies. It breaks old power structures. And it makes your army shockingly flexible. Units can be reassigned, commanders rotated, tactics swapped without the usual drama. And at the top of this military pyramid, you, the Khan, the whisper in the wind, the name mothers use to quiet children at night. You don't just rely on brute force. You establish something even more dangerous. A legal code. You call it the Yasa, or Ik Zasag. Great law. No one really knows exactly what was written in it, because it wasn't carved into tablets or chiseled into stone. It was memorized, recited, passed down. Some say it was flexible. Others believe it was terrifyingly strict. But everyone agrees it worked. The Yasa covers everything from murder and theft to hospitality and espionage. A few known rules. No stealing livestock. No betraying allies. No disrespecting water sources, no lying in court, no adultery, even for the Khan's relatives. Oh, and every man must serve in the army, unless he's a priest, healer, or the last surviving son in a family. Family lines matter, but only a little. Disobedience earns brutal punishment, execution, exile, or forced service in the worst units. But within that structure, there's surprising fairness. Merchants are protected, women can inherit property, and if your goat falls into someone else's well, yes, there's a section for that too. Historians still argue whether the Yasa was a single unified code or a collection of evolving rulings. Some say Genghis dictated it all at once. Others believe it was built gradually, like a snowball of common sense and vengeance. Either way, it becomes the skeletal structure of your empire. The Yasa also includes one rule that sets your empire apart: religious freedom. You've seen firsthand how belief can bind or break a tribe. So you make it law. Priests, monks, shamans, and mystics are not to be taxed or harmed. Their temples are safe. Their practices are respected. This policy isn't just generous, it's strategic. By respecting everyone's gods, you make yourself the only godless power that everyone can accept. Buddhists support you, Muslims pray for you, Christians send letters to Rome, praising your tolerance, though probably omitting the part about all the cities you've razed. And quietly, behind the curtains, your shamans still whisper to the eternal sky on your behalf. They burn bones, raid smoke, chant over the wind. You listen. You may be practical, but you're not foolish. The spirits might not care about politics, but you care about momentum. As your empire begins to take shape, you realize it needs speed. So, you build the YAM system, a sprawling, lightning-fast postal network that connects the far corners of your growing territory. Relay stations are built every 25 miles, stocked with fresh horses, supplies, and guards. Your couriers wear special belts, jarej, that grant them right of way anywhere. They can commandeer food, shelter, or even a bed for the night. Anyone who delays them, punished harshly. Messages fly from battlefield to capital in days. Spies, scouts, and merchants ride the same routes. Information moves faster than arrows. And information, as you well know, is how you conquer without being seen. This system will outlive you. Centuries later, Marco Polo will use it. Chinese dynasties will adopt it. The modern post office owes its soul to your saddle and your system. But not everything runs smoothly. With power comes tension. You appoint your sons to command key regions: Yochi to the west, Chagatai to the center, Ogadei to the heart of the empire. But they bicker, especially Yochi and Chagatai. You see, Yochi was born shortly after Borte was rescued from the Merkits. There are whispers, ugly ones, that he's not really your son. You never entertain them publicly, but the damage is there, like a crack in a frozen lake. You try to mediate, assigning them separate commands. Jochi gets the western edge, far, but rich in pasture and raiding. Chagatai gets the central steppe. Ogadei, the reliable one, stays close. Historians still debate whether this decision was pragmatic or an early mistake. Either way, it plants the seed of future division, a crack that will widen after your death. But for now, the machine holds. Let's pause for a lighter moment. There's a strange, half-historical story that claims you once executed a man for bathing during a drought because it was considered an insult to the water spirits. Some scholars say that's nonsense. Others say it was part of the Yasa's respect for nature. Either way, it shows how you maintained ecological awareness centuries before it became trendy. You don't chop forests without cause. You rotate pastures. You preserve certain rivers and lakes. Not because you're a hippie, but because empire runs on sustainability. You even establish a protected zone around sacred Birken Kalden Mountain, your spiritual heartland. No hunting, no firewood collection. It becomes a Mongol Eden, reserved for prayer and memory. And always you ride. You visit the camps. You speak with your soldiers. You check on the herds, the training drills, the grain stores. You listen to disputes like a tribal judge, handing out swift justice. Your tent becomes a courtroom, war room, and chapel all at once. No palace, no throne, just felt walls and a view of the horizon. Your message is simple. I am one of you. That's why they follow you. Not because you're invincible, but because you never stop moving, never stop watching, never stop working. And so, the banner of the 9 white yak tails flies higher now than ever before. It is peace. It is power. It is the signal that Genghis Khan has unified the steppe, and the world is next. Your horse kicks up a puff of dust as it crests the ridge. Below, a city sprawls, Zhongdu, the proud capital of the Jin dynasty, surrounded by thick stone walls and lush gardens. Tall towers shimmer in the hazy light, their tiled roofs glinting like beetle wings. Merchants bustle, bells ring from Buddhist temples. The air smells faintly of incense and boiling soy. And you're about to set the whole thing on fire. But don't worry, you're not here to burn for the sake of burning. This is business. Empire business. You've conquered the steppe. You've united the tribes. Now, you're turning your gaze toward the riches of China. Not for vengeance, not even for glory. You're here because cities like this are fat with silver, silk, and bureaucratic incompetence. And no one takes advantage of that like a Mongol with a longbow and a 5-year plan. The Jin dynasty has ruled northern China for over a century. They are Khitan Mongolic in origin, ironically enough. Nomads who settled, got comfy, and now act like Confucian aristocrats. They wear silk robes. They write poetry. They sip tea in pavilions while the world crumbles around them. Your scouts call them wolves in silk robes. And they mean it as an insult. These people once knew the wind. Now they fear it. You've already clashed with the Jin before, back in 1211. That was the beginning of your war with China. It wasn't personal, not at first. You sent them a message, tribute in exchange for peace. They responded by executing your envoys and calling you a barbarian. Big mistake. You don't do insults lightly. You gathered your Tumens and marched through the Gobi Desert, descending on Jin forts like a sandstorm. By 1215, you took Zhongdu. The siege was brutal. Your men surrounded the walls with trenches, catapults, fire arrows. People inside starved. Dogs howled. Smoke curled for miles. When the gates finally fell, you let your army make an example. And oh, did they ever. But here's the twist. You didn't stay. That's what baffles the Chinese historians. You conquer the capital, and then you leave. Why? Because you're not a king in the traditional sense. You don't want to rule cities. You want them to work for you. So you withdraw, leaving puppet governors in place, along with spies, tribute collectors, and a few thousand men who can ride a horse faster than most armies can pack a lunch. You don't even take the title of emperor. You prefer Khan. It's older, purer, less sticky. But make no mistake, this wasn't a retreat. It was an audit, a test run. You've seen the riches. You've learned their weaknesses. And now, you're preparing to take all of China, piece by piece. To do that, you need more than soldiers. You need brains. And that means welcoming people who look nothing like you, speak in courtly whispers, and write in characters you can't read. You begin recruiting Uyghur scribes who already use a written alphabet and understand bureaucracy, Persian administrators, skilled in tax collection and logistics, Chinese engineers, experts in siege weapons, river control, and supply chains, even Muslim astronomers and physicians. Because, hey, if someone can read the stars or treat gout with goat livers, why not? Your court becomes a mosaic of languages, scripts, and agendas. And you? You sit at the center like the eye of a storm, watching it all swirl. You adopt what works. You discard what doesn't. You learn quickly. You listen. And when someone like Yalu Chukai, a Confucian scholar of Khitan descent, tells you that slaughtering Chinese peasants reduces future tax revenue, you actually listen. Conquering an empire, he says, is easy. Governing one is harder. You nod. Then you put him in charge of census taking and tax policy. He becomes one of your most trusted advisors. This is what sets you apart. You're not just a raider anymore. You're a ruler who learns. You don't impose your steppe culture everywhere. You adapt. You allow local laws to persist, so long as they don't contradict the Yasa. You build administrative districts. You create a passport system with metal medallions that grant safe passage across the empire. And you start using paper money, issued under Chinese guidance, stamped with your seal, backed by your word. Traders love it. Bandits hate it. Taxmen get very excited. This hybrid system, steppe ruthlessness, fused with Chinese administration, becomes the blueprint for one of the largest, longest-lasting empires in world history. Of course, there are setbacks. The Tangut Kingdom in the west tries to play cute. They promise tribute, then stall. You send reminders. They ignore you. You send troops. They ambush them. Wrong move. You delay other campaigns, double back, and obliterate them. You reduce their capital to rubble. You destroy irrigation canals, torch libraries, erase dynastic lines. It is one of the few times you exterminate an entire ruling class. Why so brutal? Because betrayal is worse than resistance. At least an enemy who fights you is being honest. But someone who smiles, signs a treaty, and then stabs your envoy in the back, they don't get a second chance. And then comes your next big gamble. The Khwarezmian Empire, a Persian Islamic dynasty ruling Central Asia, rich in cities like Samarkand, Bukhara, and Urgench. You send them a caravan of merchants, gifts, olive branches. Their Shah, Ala-ad-Din Muhammad, responds by seizing the goods and executing your envoys. You've seen this movie before. You know the ending. You gather your generals. You point to the map. You say, "This man has destroyed the law of nations. He has killed my messengers. He has robbed me. He has spit in the face of heaven." You ride west, not with rage, but with purpose. But that, dear rider, is the next chapter. For now, look at the empire you've carved. From Korea to the Aral Sea, from the Siberian forests to the Yellow River. And it's only 12 or 20. You fought like a wolf. Now, you're learning to govern like a fox in a silk robe, with claws hidden in the sleeves. The world is still calling you a barbarian, but behind your eyes, there's law, strategy, mercy, memory, and a long list of cities yet to kneel. The sun hasn't even risen, but you're already awake. Boots laced tight, bow across your back. There's frost on your tent ropes, and steam curling from the mouths of horses nearby. You step into the silence of dawn and feel the weight of something more than cold. You feel the weight of law, not scrolls, not robes, not temple edicts or imperial mandates. Your law is older, sharper, simpler. It's called the Yasa, and today, like every day, you live and breathe by it, or die. Let's rewind for a second. Back when you were just Temujin, a nobody with a dead father and a bone to pick, the world was full of betrayal. Friends turned enemies. Brothers stabbed brothers. Even your own blood, Jamuka, your sworn blood brother, abandoned you for a flashier crown. You knew that survival wasn't about power. It was about loyalty, about rules that never bend, not even for your favorite cousin. So as you rose in rank and the tribes began to fall in behind you, you laid down a code, not whispered promises, but iron commands. The Yasa isn't written on paper. It lives in memory, passed from mouth to ear, word for word, like a prayer. It's part legal code, part war doctrine, part spiritual compass. It governs everything from battlefield discipline to family disputes, to how much meat a soldier can steal from a neighbor's pot without being lashed. Spoiler, not much. Here are a few gems: murder, theft, or betrayal. Death, desertion, death. Lying, death. Washing clothes in running water, weirdly specific. But also death, spilling another man's milk. Honestly, still death. Sounds harsh. That's kind of the point. The steppe isn't forgiving. Neither are you. But the Yasa isn't just about fear. It's about order. In a world where tribes once ripped each other apart over grazing rights, the Yasa is what lets you turn chaos into a war machine. Even your enemies notice it. A Persian chronicler marvels that your men don't loot until ordered, don't leave a battle formation, and don't touch a prisoner without permission. He sounds confused, possibly a little scared. The Yasa is your empire's spinal cord. It stretches from the snowy peaks of the Altai to the markets of Samarkand. It makes a merchant safe on roads that used to be a gauntlet of bandits. It means a Persian, a Rus, and a Mongol can share a fire without killing each other over tea etiquette. But law alone doesn't make an empire. It needs something else. Brotherhood. And for you, that's more than just a good hug and a toast. It's Anda, a bond deeper than blood. Temujin and Jamuka were Andas once, sworn brothers. They drank the same milk, fought the same enemies, made the same promises. But ambition broke them. That betrayal taught you a lesson. So, when you rose to power, you started forging new Andas, the right kind. Loyal men, proven in fire. You didn't just promote people based on family. You promoted them based on merit. A blacksmith's son could command a Chuman if he had the guts and brains for it. Case in point, Subutai. He wasn't a noble. He wasn't even old enough to grow a beard when he started following you. But he had eyes like a hawk and a brain that saw through battle like wind through grass. You made him one of your generals, and he'd go on to campaign more miles than Napoleon, Alexander, and Caesar combined. Another example, JB the Arrow. He literally shot your horse out from under you during a skirmish. Instead of executing him, you admired his skill and made him a commander. Because in your book, loyalty beats legacy. Now picture this. You and your inner circle, Subutai, JB, your sons, your generals, gathered in a felt tent at twilight. The air smells of firewood, fermented mare's milk, and old leather. You're talking strategy, but more than that, you're building something even more precious than maps. Trust. These aren't just military meetings. They're rituals. You pass the bowl clockwise. You speak plainly. You listen closely. Every word is weighed. Every glance means something. You don't play court games. You don't wear a crown heavy with jewels. Your title, Khan of Khans, means nothing if the men in this circle don't believe in it. But they do, because they've seen you ride for days without food. They've seen you risk your life in battle. They've seen you hold your temper when insulted and strike like lightning when it matters. And perhaps most importantly, you keep your word. When you say you'll reward someone, You do. When you say you'll spare a city if it surrenders, you do. And if someone breaks the yasa, you punish them, even if they're your cousin, your son, or your oldest friend. That's what makes you terrifying. Not just the arrows, the siege engines, the speed, but the predictability. You are the storm with a schedule. The yasa covers the weird stuff too, like how you can't urinate in water, or eat with your left hand, or step on a threshold. Why? Historians still argue about that. Maybe it's superstition. Maybe it's about respecting spirits. Maybe it's just Mongol vibes. But here's the truth. When everyone shares the same taboos, they feel like one body, like one heartbeat, one mind, one war cry. That's what you've built. Not just a war band, not just an empire, but a brotherhood wrapped in bone-deep law. And there's another layer. You've begun to codify the yasa. Not on paper, not yet. But your officials, especially the Chinese scribes and Muslim scholars in your growing court, are writing it down, adapting it, debating the finer points of livestock restitution and cross-cultural marriage law. They're starting to turn your oral firebrand of a code into a governing system that could outlast you. Will it? Well, historians still argue whether the yasa was truly formalized or just an evolving collection of precedent and tradition. Some say it was more myth than manual, a useful fiction. Others insist it was detailed, vast, and terrifyingly efficient. You don't much care. All that matters is that your men follow it, and your enemies fear it. Now imagine this. A Rus knight captures a Mongol courier. He opens the scroll the man was carrying. It's not a map. It's a list of laws, severe, consistent, and translated into 4 languages. He's confused. He expected savagery. He found a state. Because the Mongol war machine isn't just bows and hooves. It's rules, brotherhood, and brutal justice. You ride with 10,000 men, but it feels like one soul moving across the steppe. And when one of your commanders breaks rank during a hunt, you don't blink when he's lashed in front of everyone. Even you aren't above the code. If the yasa required your blood, you'd offer your neck without flinching. Because in the end, this isn't just a law code. It's your legacy. Bones will crumble. Cities will burn. But the memory of your justice, that echo, will ride further than your armies ever could. You ride at a gallop. No, not just you. Dozens of riders. Hundreds. Hooves blur into thunder. Dust boils behind you, like smoke from a storm cloud. You don't speak, you don't slow, and you definitely don't stop for scenery. There's a message under your saddle, and the empire depends on it. If you so much as dismount to pee, someone else is already replacing you. Welcome to the YAM, the Mongol postal relay system. Or, as one exhausted Chinese official once called it, a road where the wind has horses. You didn't invent the idea of postal stations. The Persians had them. The Chinese perfected them. Even the Romans flirted with them. But what you did? You made the YAM fast, furious, and terrifyingly efficient. Picture this, a series of small stations called urtus, dotting the empire's roads at regular intervals, about every 25 to 40 kilometers. Each one stocked with fresh horses, food, fuel, and replacement riders, all placed with surgical precision across tens of thousands of kilometers. You could carry a message from Beijing to Baghdad in less time than it takes a merchant to haggle over a bolt of silk. And that's not just legend. Some sources claim messages crossed 200-300 kilometers per day, a speed Europe wouldn't match until railroads centuries later. How? Because of you, the great Khan. Because you obsessed over logistics, the way a wolf obsesses over wind direction. You made sure the yam wasn't just about communication, it was about control. Your envoys carry more than news. They carry diplomatic demands, imperial decrees, and sometimes the odd severed ear. Yeah, let's talk about that. See, Mongol messages weren't always pretty. Sometimes they weren't even on paper. A captured spy might be tattooed with information and released. An ambassador might carry a threat woven into a knot-code sash. One particularly unlucky diplomat was sent home to a rebellious lord with his mouth sewn shut, a polite suggestion that he listen more and talk less. Then there were the paisas, those shiny little medallions that function like supercharged backstage passes, made of gold, silver, or iron, and stamped with your imperial seal. A paisa let the bearer demand horses, supplies, and shelter at any station. You might think that would cause chaos. Too many riders, not enough oats. But you had inspectors, secret ones, riding behind the couriers, watching, judging, reporting, break protocol, misuse a paitsa, delay a dispatch. Well, the yasa applies here too. And let's just say it doesn't involve a warning letter. But this is more than just a glorified pony express. This is your empire's circulatory system. Messages pulse through it like blood. If a city falls, you know within days. If a rival Khan plots rebellion, you know before he's even done whispering. Grain harvests, tax records, enemy troop movements, astronomical anomalies, even the health of horses, all of it flows to your ears. And to keep the yam roads working smoothly, you did something genius. You gave the job of maintaining the relay stations to local communities, but with strict quotas and iron rewards. A village that kept its station stocked got tax breaks. One that let its hay stores rot might suddenly become a relocation project. Oh, and you standardized roads, not just trails through the grasslands, but actual marked postal highways, with distance markers, boundary stones, and bridges reinforced for cavalry weight. Even in the harshest stretches, deserts, mountains, snow-choked passes, your riders came true. One scribe in the Middle East, jaw agape, wrote, "They gallop through snow and fire with equal ease." Dramatic? Sure. But he wasn't wrong. Let's get weird for a second. You know how sometimes a Mongol envoy would wear strips of flesh tied around his waist? Those weren't war trophies. They were coated skin scrolls, thin slices of animal hide, tattooed or etched with messages, then worn as belts or wound around the arm. They were waterproof, fire-resistant, and nearly impossible to detect unless you knew where to look. Some historians argue whether these flesh-tied messages were truly common or just the stuff of travelers' tales. But enough records exist, particularly from Persian and Chinese sources, to suggest this wasn't just fantasy. You didn't just invent a mail system. You weaponized information. And sometimes, when your envoy couldn't carry words, he carried symbols: a blood-stained arrow, a knot in a rope, a broken spear, half wrapped in silk. Each had a message: surrender, fight, prepare, mourn. The Mongols didn't always need language. They had signs that spoke louder. So, what does it feel like to be one of your imperial messengers? It feels like freedom and terror in equal measure. You're 20 maybe. Wiry, fast, guts of iron. You ride for 3 days straight, changing horses so often you forget which one you started with. You eat with one hand, sleep with one eye open. Wolves follow you. Bandits fear you. Why? Because if someone hurts a Mongol messenger, even by accident, you burn their city to the ground. That's not a metaphor. That's a policy. When the Khwarezmian Shah murdered your envoys, you personally crossed the desert and wiped his entire empire off the map. That's the Mongol definition of "you up" in message form. And here's a delicious irony. All this speed, this flow of information, it benefits your enemies too. The yam helps merchants. It helps scholars. It helps ambassadors from other empires who marvel that they can travel thousands of miles with free supplies and fresh horses at every station. Some call your empire a tyranny. Others call it the iron frame of the world. But none deny this. You made movement possible. You made it safe. Well, as safe as it can be when you occasionally execute a courier for arriving late. Still, the system isn't perfect. There are times when a message gets lost in a snowstorm, when a horse dies beneath a rider and no spare can be found, when a station burns down, or worse, rebels intercept the courier. That's when you see the limits of empire. Not every road can be paved with fear. Some must be maintained with loyalty, foresight, and backup plans. And that's why you make sure multiple messages travel by multiple routes. You don't just rely on one rider. You dispatch 3, 4, sometimes 7. You're not just sending a note. You're betting the empire's future on timing. And somehow it works. One day, you receive a scroll from the western frontier. A rebellion has broken out. You read the message. You roll it up. You don't flinch. Because you already knew. The yam told you days ago. You've already dispatched a 2-man. You've already planned their route. You even sent their commander a coded message written in knots. By the time your enemies raise their banner, your reply is already galloping toward them. They say your arrows never miss, but your messages, They arrive faster than arrows fly. This is how you rule an empire. Not with smoke signals or ox carts, but with a relay of thunder, a whisper across the steppe that could topple kingdoms. Your empire bleeds news. It breathes orders. It pulses like a living thing. And you are its heart. The walls of Merv don't just tower, they breathe. Hot air shimmers above sun-baked stone. Beneath that stone, behind heavy cedar gates and ramparts studded with clay and blood, lie secrets older than even your grandfather's grandfather could remember. The city of Merv is a jewel on the Silk Road, a crossroads of math, manuscripts, and melon vendors who insist their fruit is sweeter than paradise itself. And it's about to be unpicked by the most unlikely craftsmen of war. A team of foreign engineers from all corners of your ever-widening empire. They don't wear armor. They don't chant before battle. Most of them can't ride a horse. Some can't even speak a common language. But when they arrive outside a fortress, armed with scrolls, pulleys, and a suspicious number of copper tubes, the walls start counting down. You've raided cities before. Walls climb, cities fall. But something changes as your armies push deeper into Persia and the edges of the Islamic world. The architecture stiffens. Fortifications grow absurd. Moats widen. Gatehouses multiply. And towers bristle like porcupines. No matter how brave your horsemen are, no matter how many arrows they rain, these new cities won't crack from brute force alone. So once again you adapt. You start dragging siege engineers with you. Not just one or two, but entire mobile war laboratories. Where do they come from? From wherever you've been. From northern China, you recruit men who built the great walls of Zhongdu and Kaifeng. From Persia, you pluck architects who once designed caravanserais and canal systems. From Khwarezm, you spare scribes who know how to calculate tension and load from memory. From Transoxiana, you borrow minds trained on Ptolemaic geometry and Old Greek siege texts passed down through Arab translations. This is the Empire's newest weapon, a roving nerd squad with world-ending potential. They come bearing knowledge, strange gadgets, and a deep dislike of tents. One of their favorite toys is the counterweight trebuchet, a beauty of physics and spite. The Chinese call it the Hui Pao, Muslim catapult, though, ironically, most of the first designs came from Syrian and Byzantine sources. These machines don't throw small stones. They hurl wagon-sized boulders, full-sized trees, or in a particularly memorable incident, flaming bundles of diseased animal guts. Yes, they weaponize plague carcasses, quirky detail of the night. They sometimes wrap infected meat in cloth, dyed with fake religious symbols, just to mess with defenders psychologically. That's right. Imagine catching typhoid from a cow, dressed like your village's patron saint. It's as gross as it is effective. But Merv doesn't fall in a single night. It moans, cracks, and finally splinters over days. The engineers work in shifts. You wake to the rhythmic groan of winding winches. You eat salted goat while watching masons test the firing angle of a thunder barrel carved from solid cedar. Your generals once mocked these soft-fingered tinkerers. Now they bow when one enters a strategy tent, and when the walls finally tumble, the gates yawning like a snapped jaw. The result isn't just victory, it's devastation, so precise, it feels mathematical. Your horse clops across shattered archways and roof tiles that once housed philosophers. There's silence where once there were scribes. The scholars of Merv once claimed it was the greatest city in the world. Now it is ash. Historians still argue whether the destruction of Merv was the result of intentional demographic punishment or an unplanned overflow of vengeance. What is known? By the end, corpses outnumber the living by a terrible margin. Some medieval accounts say the canals ran red. Others claim 700,000 died, though modern scholars debate whether the numbers are exaggerated. Maybe, but when you ride through its corpse, the numbers barely matter. Not every siege ends in a slaughter. At Herat, your engineers blow open 2 sections of wall using a mix of sapping tunnels and catapulted oil. But instead of ordering a massacre, you offer leniency, food, reconstruction, protection for the local mosque. Why? Because Herat had scholars you didn't want to lose. Poets, mathematicians, illuminated manuscript artists with calligraphy so fine you needed a magnifying glass just to admire the gold filigree. Besides, word spreads faster than blood. Cities now surrender at the sight of your engineers. Here's a detail that doesn't make many textbooks. You start organizing your engineers into units, just like cavalry. They have their own command structure, their own tents, their own campfire rituals, some of which involve drinking warm goat milk while debating the tensile strength of poplar wood. You give them a name that sticks: the Iron Mines. Not very poetic, but effective. And what the Iron Mines build for you next will change warfare forever. Portable siege towers, smoke machines, early gunpowder canisters, and perhaps, most terrifying of all, repeating crossbow carts mounted on wheels. Did they work well? Not always. One famously exploded and flattened a general's tent. But the intimidation factor? Sky high. The world takes notice. Back in Baghdad, caliphs whisper that the Mongols are now harnessing the minds of the men who bend fire. In Cairo, rumors spread that the Mongols have brought Chinese dragons west, meaning siege rockets, or maybe just the psychological ghosts of what they leave behind. Even in Europe, where most nobles still believe you eat raw children and ride bears to breakfast, word spreads of your new weapons. Monks in Saxony record sketches of impossible machines, slings the size of cathedrals, carts that vomit smoke, archers with 7-fingered gloves. Exaggerations, maybe, but not entirely untrue. You are no longer just a force of warriors. You are a machine with gears made of people. Mongol cavalry provides the shock. Administrators deliver the structure. And engineers? They supply the edge that makes everything else look like a dull stone. Even your enemies start copying you. The Delhi Sultanate begins importing Chinese siege engineers. The Abbasids start training demolition squads. And in far-off Italy, the name Mongol starts to mean something more than barbarian. It starts to mean inevitable. And that's the real lesson here. You didn't win because your horses were fast, or because your men were tough. You won because you recruited knowledge, even from conquered peoples, especially from them. You took the finest minds from Shanghai to Samarkand and said, "Work for me, and I won't burn your books." And for the ones who agreed, you gave them tools, safety, glory. And in return, they gave you walls that fell, towers that toppled, cities that shook. Not bad for a bunch of guys who started out chasing goats across the plains. Now, you wield catapults built by Persian dreamers, rockets drafted by Chinese monks, and fire pots filled by Syrian chemists. The world's oldest cities are falling, one by one, and the last sound they hear before the gates collapse, a soft click, as the counterweight locks into place. Dust settles, swords go quiet, and then the real invasion begins. Not with fire or screaming hooves this time. Not with engineers flinging cow corpses, or generals riding past piles of heads. No. Now it comes in the form of questions. Quiet, nosy, infuriating questions. How many goats does your cousin own? Who controlled this granary before us? What's the name of your dead grandfather's third wife? Welcome to the Mongol census, the soft calculated machine that follows conquest like a bookkeeper after a brawl. After the final arrow is loosed, after the last fortress collapses into itself like a stepped cake, you don't just ride on. You pause, you count, you measure, because conquest without control, that's just chaos. But conquest with paperwork, that's empire. You're riding into cities that don't even know what hit them. One moment they're under some sultan's tax code. The next, they're being told to remeasure their ox carts and recite their grandmother's birthplaces. See, Genghis Khan didn't just want to burn the world. He wanted to know how many people, sheep, bricks, fish ponds, and fermented milk barrels were inside it. And once you conquer something, he wants you to make it legible, a wordless world made suddenly readable. So he creates a system. It's built on Chinese bureaucratic habits, Persian tax tricks, and a whole lot of suspiciously detailed memory from scribes who were supposed to be dead. You march with generals in one hand and clerks in the other. Let's start with the basics. The census takers. They arrive in pairs or trios, riding behind the main force like vultures, dressed in silk and ink. They don't carry swords. They carry books, or more accurately, rolled bundles of parchment tucked inside bamboo tubes. Their tools? A quill, a small abacus, and a whip. Not to hurt you, but to keep peasants standing in straight lines. They count everything. Number of males over 10. Number of grain stores per village. Number of cartwheels in active rotation. Number of monks, beggars, blacksmiths, midwives, and cheese vats. And if they can't count it, they invent a metric. You once heard of a census team that measured the productivity of a Persian orchard by weighing bird droppings on individual fig branches. Historians still argue whether this was genuine agricultural data collection or just bored scribes, showing off. Either way, the figs got taxed. What's so fascinating and eerie is how fast it all happens. Within weeks of a city's fall, Mongol census takers are moving door to door with templates for how to reclassify households. They divide locals into tidy blocks, groups of 10, 100, 1,000. These units become the foundation of your control: military, fiscal, and spiritual. Every 10th man is made responsible for the other 9. Every 100th, even more so. Screw up your taxes, and your superior suffers with you. It's bureaucracy with a hostage clause. The Mongols call these groups Arban 10, Jaghun 100, Mingan 1,000, and Tumen 10,000. Originally military units, they've become civil administration pods. Each one has a leader, and each leader answers to someone a little higher up, all the way to the Khan. It's neat, it's scalable, it's terrifyingly efficient. Here's the kicker. You use the same structure to collect taxes, deliver orders, draft soldiers, assign marriages, and spread propaganda. If you ever wondered what happened after all those cities fell, the answer is they got spreadsheeted into oblivion. And it's not just people. You're counting everything: sheep, chickens, religious minorities, goldsmiths, plowshares, beehives, tattoo artists, priests who speak more than 3 languages, number of camel tail hairs used in regional calligraphy brushes. No joke. There's an actual record of census officials arguing over the camel hair quotas used in scriptoriums. That's your quirky tidbit for this section. So, what do you do with all this data? First, you tax. Not randomly, surgically. You know exactly how much barley a family grew in the last 3 seasons. You know how many oxen they borrowed from their neighbor. You adjust their tax rate with all the cold, mathy precision of a spreadsheet nerd with a vengeance. Second, you draft. Every 10th household sends a young man. The rest fund his armor, food, and training. The Mongol army becomes a tax-subsidized war machine, fueled by accurate rolls and annual reports. Third, and most chillingly, you identify. You now know exactly which villages have dissenters, priests, hidden wealth, or odd dialects. If rebellion stirs, you cut it off at the root. Because you already drew the map, the effects ripple outward. In Persia, city administrators are stunned to find Mongol officials demanding receipts, not bribes. In Central Asia, old tribal systems are dismantled and rebuilt under neatly numbered panels. Even in China, where bureaucracy is basically a religion, the Mongols start introducing hybrid systems, combining Confucian principles with Mongol control cells. It's a weird blend of harsh and methodical, brutal, but with margins and bullet points. And here's a historical debate that still sparks lectures and sighs. Was the Mongol census system truly centralized? Or was it an illusion of control? Some argue that the Khans merely borrowed the shell of empire, letting local officials do the real work while slapping a Mongol brand on top. Others believe the data pipelines were genuinely active, flowing all the way from rural Armenian villages to a tented court in Karakoram. Modern historians dig through dusty tax rolls with Mongol seals, trying to trace lines of command. But there's no full answer yet, only tantalizing fragments. Ledgers scribbled on birch bark, letters from Venetian merchants mentioning number counters, a Chinese note about Mongol scribes using red ink only for death entries. What's certain is this: once you're in the system, you can't hide. And that's how you rule a world that doesn't speak your language, doesn't eat your food, doesn't share your gods, and probably doesn't like you much. You make them legible. A merchant in Aleppo knows what he'll pay in wool tax this year. A farmer in Samarkand can calculate exactly how many jars of millet he'll hand over, and to whom. A widow in Bukhara knows her house number, even if her walls are made of mud. This, more than any victory in the field, is the real conquest. You conquered them with arithmetic, and in return, they're building roads to your markets, sending tribute on time, translating laws into 4 languages and 10 dialects, because they know if you can be counted, you can be ruled. You ride past a village in the Hindu Kush. No shouting, no fires, just chalk marks on every door, a string of Mongol tents nearby, where scribes sip fermented mare's milk and argue over census forms under flickering lanterns. The army sleeps tonight, but the ink keeps flowing, and by dawn, 3 new tax codes will exist. Where yesterday, there was only chaos. This is the empire now. You're not just conquerors. You're administrators. You're librarians of blood. You used to aim for the heart, or the throat, or the soft patch under the armpit, where armor splits like a peeled fig. But lately, your real target is tucked deeper, wrapped in skull, steeped in superstition, and ruled by stories. The mind, because by now, conquest isn't about winning battles. It's about winning the idea of a battle before it starts. You don't just strike with arrows. You strike with rumors, with echoes, with fear, engineered like siege engines, crafted, calibrated, and carefully rolled across the mental landscape of your enemies long before your hooves ever touch their soil. It starts small. A trader arrives at a village market in eastern Anatolia. He's got Mongol coins and a mule with odd leather wrappings. When asked where he came from, he mutters something about the last city that resisted, how it was flattened into a plain of bricks, how the river still runs red. A few weeks later, a monk in a coastal monastery records a strange tale. A city surrendered before a single soldier arrived. Not because they were surrounded, but because they thought they would be. This is the new weapon. Psychological warfare. Centuries before anyone coined the phrase. You ride at the front of it now. A ghost before the army. A whisper on the wind. A calculated idea. You don't even need to raise a flag. The rumor does that for you. It says, the Mongols are coming, and then it gets specific. They say you're riding tigers, that you catapult infected priests into churches, that you can fire arrows in complete darkness and still hit a man between the eyes. that you drink the blood of poets and sew captives' mouths shut with silk shred. None of this needs to be true, but it helps, because once you've taken the enemy's imagination hostage, the rest of their defenses crumble like stale bread. You learn this early. It's in the little things. The ritual decapitations you sometimes stage, just outside city gates, not for tactical reasons, but because they make for excellent visuals. You pose heads in pyramids. You hang them on walls, facing inward, as if the dead are now watching the living. In Nishapur, when a rebellion breaks out after the governor is killed, the Mongols return, not just with fury, but with a message. An entire city is leveled, not as punishment, as theater. That's your mainstream historical fact. The complete destruction of Nishapur in 1221, which may have cost upwards of 100,000 lives, depending on which sources you believe. And that number? It's whispered more than it's recorded. It becomes legend. It becomes a warning. It becomes your greatest weapon. You're not alone in this. The Mongol leadership, from Genghis Khan to Subotai to Mongol and beyond, understands the human mind better than most kings ever understood their own bloodlines. They plan not just what to do, but how it will feel to the people watching. Want to encourage surrender? Send messengers with the exact population numbers of the next town over, and a single sentence. They resisted. Want a town to evacuate before you arrive. Have your scouts deliberately leak letters describing the special punishment you've prepared for their type. Want to scare a caliph into silence. March into Baghdad with the astrologers of his rivals and have them publicly predict the fall of the city on the exact date you're scheduled to arrive. Historians still argue whether these astrologers were true believers or just well-coached actors with convenient star charts. Either way, the stars aligned, and so did the terror. Some tactics are stranger still, like the wooden dummies. You remember your first use of them outside Kiev. You only had 20,000 real men, but needed the city to believe there were 80,000. So you built fake riders from bundles of straw wrapped in stolen armor. Positioned them along ridgelines. Lit campfires in circles. Let smoke drift just so. To the defenders on the walls, it looked like an army 4 times your size. Some surrendered on the spot. Others did the math, realized they were doomed, and fought anyway out of pride. But pride makes for predictable moves, and predictable moves are easy to crush. You even use silence as a weapon. In one campaign, a city refuses to open its gates, so you sit quietly for 2 days. No demands, no messengers, no drums. Then one morning, you vanish. The gates open cautiously. Scouts creep into the open plains. Nothing. But when they return to the walls, they find the corpses of their patrol nailed to the city gates in perfect symmetry, each with a coin in their mouth. Message received. We were already inside. There's a fringe rumor, your quirky tidbit for this stretch, that Mongol generals once carried trained ravens to send messages back to their own troops through the minds of their enemies. Some say the birds flew in visible circles above cities marked for doom. Is it true you never see the ravens yourself? But once, after a battle in Transoxiana, you hear a surviving guard murmur, "The birds flew, and then we died." You smile. True or not, the story is now part of the spell. You weaponize culture too. When invading Islamic territories, you sometimes promise safety to mosques, only to torch the wealth inside while sparing the walls. Why? Because it reinforces the idea that only humility survives Mongol attention. In China, you hire Confucian scholars to rewrite their own histories, subtly inserting Mongol virtues into the stories of old dynasties. The phrase "heavenly favor" becomes a branding slogan. By the time locals realize what's happening, their own legends already serve your cause. And then there's the art of surrendering well. You don't just want cities to submit. You want them to submit with flair. Public kneeling, processions of bread and salt, children singing songs that praise the great Khan's mercy. That way, future cities see surrender not just as survival, but as honor. You create a script, and like all good theater, it travels. Eventually, you reach a point where the threat of Mongol invasion is stronger than the actual invasion. Cities change hands without a battle. Rulers pay tribute before you demand it. An Armenian lord mails you the keys to his citadel with a note saying he's already evicted the local tax evaders. That's not conquest, that's a franchise. But the most chilling part? You start to turn this inward. You use psychological tactics within your own ranks too. Disloyal commanders are executed publicly, with rumors deliberately spread that their horses were also cursed. A general who failed to hold a bridge is forced to walk across it blindfolded, while bards sing about the river, rejecting cowardice. Even Mongol soldiers begin to believe your failure will find you, maybe in the field, maybe in the mind. In the end, this is the legacy you shape, not just of speed or slaughter or strategy, but of intimidation by design. You understand what most warlords never do, that people don't fear the arrow itself. They fear the story behind it, the possibility of what it might mean, the whisper that rides ahead of it like a shadow cast by something massive and inevitable. The Mongol Empire is built on hooves, yes, but it expands on fear, rumor, and belief. You conquer minds before you ever draw a sword, and the echo of your approach becomes louder than any battle cry. You've ridden through deserts that whistle like kettles, forests that choke on their own silence, and steps so flat they might as well be the floor of the world. But this place, this wide, golden plain where the grass sways like a nervous army and the wind never quite rests, this is different. This is Genghis Khan's favorite battlefield. Not because it's scenic, not because it's convenient, but because here, he learned what it meant to unmake an empire. The year is 1219, and you're staring across the Khwarezmian Empire, a Persian-speaking powerhouse, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Hindu Kush. Rich cities, silk-clad warriors, markets blooming with spices and paper. Their Shah is aloof, intelligent, and utterly convinced that the Mongols are a distant problem. Spoiler, he's wrong. And soon, you'll prove it. One city at a time. Let's rewind just a hair. Genghis had sent a diplomatic caravan to the Shah. Humble, peaceful, respectful. But at Otrar, the border city, the governor accused the Mongols of spying, seized their goods, and murdered the entire envoy. The Shah didn't punish the governor. In fact, he doubled down and executed a second delegation sent directly by Genghis himself, including one of his own diplomats. That was a bad idea, because when you execute Mongol messengers, you're not stopping war, you're inviting it. What follows is not just a military campaign, it is a vendetta, a demonstration, a lesson Genghis intends to tattoo into the flesh of cities. And it begins here, on these rolling plains between the Jaxartes and the Oxus rivers. This is where your army halts, fans out, and begins the great westward smash. No more whispers, no more games. It is here that Genghis plays his most spectacular cards. You command somewhere in the central ranks, watching as three separate Mongol columns move with clockwork precision. Yochi to the north, Chagatai and Ogaday through the center. Genghis himself sweeping from the south with Subotai whispering suggestions at his elbow. Three armies in perfect harmony. It's not just speed, it's orchestration. Each unit moves like a finger, separate, but all answering to the same mind. Your first major target, Bukhara. It is said that when the Mongols arrived, the city's defenders numbered in the tens of thousands, brimming with confidence behind their walls. And then the walls fell. Whether it took days or weeks, historians still argue. Some sources claim a local garrison collapsed from within. Others say the walls were breached with cunning siegecraft and treachery from a nearby suburb. One even describes a false retreat, that signature Mongol trick, where your cavalry pretends to flee only to lure defenders into a trap. Either way, Bukhara burns. Here comes your mainstream fact. After the city fell in 1220, Genghis Khan addressed the people in the Friday Mosque. Perhaps the only time he ever gave a public speech. He told them, if you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. Yikes. Now you know why this place is his favorite battlefield. It's not just about victory, it's about message. Then comes Samarkand, the jewel of the empire. Walls as wide as a road. A garrison of 100,000. Elephants. War drums. But against the Mongols, elephants panic. War drums in their own echo. The siege unfolds with chilling precision. Genghis brings siege engineers from China, including specialists in trebuchets, smoke screens, and psychological warfare. Rumor has it, he even uses captured enemy engineers from earlier cities to help bring down their sister strongholds. Talk about forced collaboration. Within days, Samarkand falls. And what happens inside those walls? Nobody really knows. Or rather, too many know too many things. Some say the population was slaughtered wholesale. Others claim that artisans and scholars were spared. Many were enslaved. Some were just disappeared, blended into the machine of empire. What's certain is this: Samarkand ceased to be a Persian jewel and became a Mongol memory. There's a quirky tidbit passed around Mongol camps about this campaign that Genghis's war drum was made from the cured skin of a Khwarezmian prince, stretched so tight across the frame it sang with rage. Nobody knows if it's true, but every time that drum beat hits across the plain, you swear it sounds like regret. After that, the cities begin falling like dominoes. Otrar, Urgench, Nishapur, Merv, each with its own flavor of doom, each wiped with such precision and terror that the empire's infrastructure collapses before its armies do. Khwarezm is unmaking itself now. Every city you take adds 1,000 fear stories to the wind. And the Shah, the man who started it all, he flees eastward like a hunted fox, chased by Subutai and Jebe across half the known world in one of the longest pursuit operations in history. Months and months of riding, tracking, taunting. He eventually dies on a lonely island in the Caspian Sea, tormented and exiled from his own people. No last stand, just cold, wet silence. That's what makes this Genghis's favorite battlefield. It's not the grass, it's not the sky, it's the transformation. Here, he turns an empire into ashes, turns revenge into a campaign, turns cities into rumors, and rumors into tools. Here, you learn what it means to dismantle power, not with force alone, but with rhythm, with coordination, with narrative. By the time you leave these plains, you've changed too. You've seen surrender negotiated with nothing but smoke signals and ghost camps. You've seen catapults hurling bundles of plague-infested clothing into crowded cities. Long before germ theory was a thing, you've seen prisoners marched ahead as human shields, their faces painted red to confuse enemy archers and mess with morale. You've seen resistance drowned, not in blood, but in hopelessness. There's one last detail from this campaign you can't shake. It's not a battle, it's a moment. Somewhere near the ruins of Merv, a Mongol officer finds a child, a scribe's daughter, hiding in a clay jar. She's been surviving for days on spilled honey and rainwater. When she's pulled out, trembling and wide-eyed, she looks up and whispers, "Is the war over yet?" He doesn't answer, because in your heart, you know the answer. For the Mongols, the war is never over. It just changes shape. And this place, these blood-fed plains, these echoing ruins, this will always be the Khan's favorite. Not because he won here, but because he showed the world how it would lose. The storm never ends. You'd think after smashing the Khwarezmian Empire like a pottery bowl flung from a rooftop, the Mongol machine might slow down, pause, perhaps, to digest its gains, let its horses rest, let its generals sleep. But rest is for civilizations. You are Mongol, and Mongols don't rest, they ride across plains, deserts, mountains, frozen rivers, and political boundaries, across language, across fear, across the very idea of limit. And now, the sons of the storm are coming. Yoki, Chagatai, Ögedei, Tolui, Genghis's 4 sons, are no longer just sons. They are storm fronts, each with an army, a fiefdom, a vision sharpened by war and hardened by their father's expectations. And behind every hoofbeat you hear now, you sense a tension, because empires may rise from conquest, but they survive only through division. And division? That can mean trouble. Let's paint the scene. The year is somewhere around 1224. You've returned from the Western campaign, filthy, scarred, and wealthier than you ever expected to be in this lifetime. Your saddle is worn to your body. Your horse knows your whistle better than its own name. You're encamped with the Khan's army, somewhere near the Tian Shan Mountains. The fires are quiet. The steppe smells of horse sweat, pine sap, and river fog. And across the flames, you can see the sons of Genghis arguing. The great debate is this: what happens next? Joki, the eldest, broods in silence. He has always been distant, partly because of his shaky birth status. His paternity was questioned since he was born shortly after Burda's capture, partly because he commands the western frontier. He's pragmatic, quiet, possibly resentful. Chagatai II is his opposite, hot-tempered, impulsive, deeply concerned with law and tradition. He doesn't trust Yochi. He says it out loud, a lot. Ögedei, the 3rd son, is thoughtful, diplomatic, and slightly inclined toward drink. Genghis favors him as his eventual successor, not because he's the strongest, but because he's the most balanced. Tolui, the youngest, is your classic youngest child, with the added twist of commanding the Imperial Heartland Army. He's fierce, loyal, brilliant in battle. It's like watching 4 thunderclouds size each other up. Here's your mainstream fact. In 1229, after Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Kurultai Council declared Ögedei as the new Great Khan, just as Genghis had wanted. But long before that, the groundwork for the succession was already being tested, argued, and occasionally violently suggested. But for now, Genghis still lives, and he knows his sons are his greatest creation and greatest gamble. So what does he do? He gives them room to lead. You're soon swept up in new assignments. Tolui takes the Eastern campaign. Chagatai and Ögedei partner in Central Asia. Yochi returns to the wild steppes near the Ural. Each son begins shaping his own version of Mongol rule. And you? You start noticing the differences. Joki's forces rely more on diplomacy, alliances with Kipchak and Bulgar chieftains, a lighter touch. His men drink fermented mare's milk, but also wear embroidered robes and trade with Silk Road merchants. Chagatai's camp is stricter. He enforces the yasa like scripture. Thieves lose fingers. Foreigners are tolerated, but never fully trusted. His army drills daily. You feel watched. Ögedei surrounds himself with scholars and scribes, balancing conquest with construction. Roads are repaired. Relay stations, yams, pop up like mushrooms after rain. You once see him arguing about postal logistics, like a medieval Jeff Bezos. And Tolui's army is sharper, hungrier, bloodier. He burns through territories like a wildfire, searching for fuel. But when the campaign's over, he's the first to build a temple for the dead. That's the funny part. Each son reflects a shard of their father, but no single one is the Khan. Not yet. A quirky tidbit. Mongol riders under Yochi and Ögedei sometimes carried small carved turtles in their saddlebags. Not for worship, but as good luck charms, inspired by a steppe folk tale where a turtle survives a firestorm by digging into the mud. The metaphor wasn't lost on you. After all, you're surviving a storm of your own, a political one. Meanwhile, Genghis starts delegating more and more. He seems tired lately. His eyes don't scan the horizon like they used to. But when he speaks, the fire returns. He tells you one night, after too much Arag, I will not live forever, but my wind must. That's what the Mongol sons are. Really. Not heirs, winds, storms, directions, and they're already reshaping the empire. You hear whispers that Ögedei is organizing tax surveys across northern China, that Yochi is eyeing the Volga trade routes, and looking at Kiev like it's already a campfire, that Tolui just executed 50 engineers for sabotaging a watermill project. They're growing bolder, hungrier. The Khan is still here, but his shadows are learning to walk alone. Historians still argue whether Genghis deliberately played his sons against each other to sharpen them, or whether the divisions in the royal household simply mirrored the fracturing stress of a growing empire. Either way, the tensions are real, and you're caught in the middle. One day, you're sent with a detachment under Chagatai's command to enforce tribute collection in a restless town in the Fergana Valley. The people resist, not with weapons, but with songs. Old women sing in the streets, their voices cracking, calling the Mongols cursed wind demons. Children spit at your horses. The mayor offers empty sacks as a symbolic insult. Chagatai does not laugh. The punishment is swift and brutal. You watch homes burn and temples crumble. A scribe is thrown into a well for refusing to translate a decree. You feel a knot in your chest you can't untie. Later that night, by the fire, a younger soldier from Yoki's camp asks, "Do we all want the same empire?" You don't know how to answer, because maybe you're not all building the same thing anymore. And that, truly, is the beginning of the second Mongol storm. The first storm unified. It burned and roared and claimed land faster than maps could be redrawn. But the second, it fragments. The sons are riding, yes, but they're not always riding together. Still, for now, the banner holds. Genghis still breathes, and in the heart of every tent, you can still hear his name, whispered like thunder. But someday, that voice will go silent. And when it does, will the sons follow it, or chase different winds entirely? You're riding on silk roads now, Well, not literal silk. Your horse would hate that. But the pads beneath your hooves, they hum with trade, glisten with caravan dust, and shimmer with the promise of something utterly new. Peace. Not peace as in kumbaya. Not peace as in we all hold hands now. No. This is Mongol peace, Pax Mongolica, and it rides in, not with olive branches, but with thunderous hoofbeats, a watchful eye, and just enough swords to keep everyone honest. Hey, welcome to the quiet between conquests. You're years older now, not grizzled, but definitely leathered. Your cloaks got burn marks from a campfire accident in Samarkand. Your boots have been resoled in a Persian style. Your saddlebag? It's got trinkets from Baghdad, coins from Tabriz, and a worn-out Tangut poem copied by hand. You've seen the fire, but now you're seeing the ash bloom. The Mongol Empire, at its height, stretches from the Pacific to the Danube, from Siberia to Syria. It is not a single nation. It's a network of subject states, tributary kingdoms, garrisons, checkpoints, and relay stations. And beneath it all flows a new kind of power, order. The roads are safer now than they've been in centuries. Bandits, hung, pirates, drowned, corrupt officials, reassigned to the goats. Seriously, the Empire doesn't tolerate nonsense when it comes to trade. Because trade, my friend, is the Empire's blood. And you're now part of the bloodstream. You ride with caravans sometimes. You remember the first time a Persian merchant offered you a fig and told you, in perfect Mongolian, that he liked your earrings. You meet Uyghur scribes, Syrian doctors, Chinese lacquer artisans, Armenian bankers, and at least 3 people who claim to be Marco Polo's uncle. You also meet a Buddhist monk who insists the world is an illusion, then gets motion sickness when the camel rides too fast. You try not to laugh. You fail. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Pax Mongolica, which lasted from roughly 1250 to 1350, facilitated unprecedented levels of trade, communication, and cross-cultural exchange across Eurasia. It made the Silk Road not just viable, but thriving. What did it feel like? It felt like watching an empire breathe. You see bustling cities rise from the ruins you once helped create. You witness grain caravans moving east, while scrolls of Chinese medicine head west. You see Venetian glass in a yurt in Karakorum. You drink tea from cups painted with calligraphy you can't read. You wear a cloak stitched by a Jewish tailor in Bukhara and eat dumplings shaped like crescent moons from a Korean chef in Tabriz. The Mongol Empire didn't invent trade, but it plugged the arteries together and then kept them safe. Quirky tidbit: Mongol postal stations, called Yam, were spaced about 25-40 miles apart and stocked with fresh horses, supplies, and sometimes gyrs with hot soup for messengers. Travelers carried a paisa, a bronze tablet stamped with authority. Basically, a medieval VIP pass. You had one once, lost it in a game of dice, regretted it immediately. But not everything is stitched so neatly. You pass through a town in northern China that speaks Mongolian in court, but still mutters curses in Han Chinese. You see tax collectors in Georgia counting sacks of wheat, while a priest crosses himself behind their backs. You hear a Turkish blacksmith grumble that the Mongols outlawed blood feuds, but secretly paid one of his cousins to inform on him. Peace has rules, and rules don't always feel peaceful. Historians still argue whether Pax Mongolica was an intentional imperial policy or an accidental byproduct of fear and domination. Was it a grand plan or just a lucky equilibrium between conquests? You think about that while watching a Korean astronomer argue with a Baghdad philosopher under the same tent. They're shouting about lunar eclipses. A Mongol general watching the debate shrugs and says, as long as they don't stab each other, let them scream. Sounds like a policy. You're stationed for a few months in Karakorum, the imperial capital. It's not a stone fortress like Rome, or a spiraling minaret city like Baghdad. It's a crossroads. Jers ring the outskirts. Inside, a Buddhist temple here, an Nestorian church there, a giant silver fountain that sprays fermented mare's milk from lion heads and plays music when wind hits the pipes. You stare at it in awe, then immediately slip on the milk puddle and twist your ankle. Respect the art, or it'll slap you. In Karakorum, you notice something odd. Paper. It's everywhere. Mongols aren't native paper makers, but boy, do they love using it now. From the Chinese, they adopted block printing. From the Persians, bookkeeping. From the Uyghurs, script styles. You find a tavern where the menu is printed in 5 languages. It says, horse stew, 2 coins, no haggling, no music after midnight. You nod. Sensible rules. And then there's the language thing. Mongols rule over dozens of cultures, and they don't force everyone to speak one tongue. Instead, they hire interpreters. Entire garrisons are built around polyglot teams, translators who can speak Mongolian, Persian, Arabic, Russian, and at least 2 dialects of Chinese. You watch a deal brokered between a Venetian trader and a Mongol officer, using 3 intermediaries who speak in chain-link style. It's slow, but it works. When it doesn't, somebody gestures until a solution appears, usually tea. But just as the peace deepens, so does a question inside you. What happens when the storm that brought peace dies down? You hear whispers of distant revolts, of disputes between khans and their cousins, of taxes rising in China, and grumbling in the steppes. One night, an old general named Subude, you've met him once, he crushed entire kingdoms before breakfast, says to you over a bowl of soup, empires are bones, blood, and breath. Right now, we're breathing. You ask him what happens when the breath ends. He doesn't answer. But until then, Pax Mongolica keeps riding, and so do you, across bridges paved in jade, past cities whose names twist your tongue, through valleys filled with sheep, and ports filled with scholars, and steppes filled with wind. You're part of something vast, humming, golden, and even if you don't understand it all, you know this: the world has never moved this fast. You are soaked again. Only this time, it's not the icy downpour of the Russian forests or the sweat-drenched humidity of Bengal. This time, it's salt spray. A wave slaps your face sideways and makes your borrowed helmet rattle. The ship groans beneath your feet, like it resents every decision that brought it here. You squint toward the horizon. There's land. Again. And again. It's covered in bristling pines, fortified ridges, and enough Korean spears to make your stomach clench. You're back in Goryeo, and they are still not surrendering. The year is 1258, or maybe 1259, or maybe it's 1260, and you've just stopped counting. Time gets weird when you keep returning to the same battlefield, wearing out your boots on the same gravel roads, refighting the same stubborn kingdom. Goryeo, what we now call Korea, is like a fortress disguised as a peninsula. You've marched the length of it more than once by now. You've sacked Kaesong, its capital. You've burned palaces, taken hostages, watched local aristocrats bend the knee and then twist upright the moment your back is turned. These people are persistent, not in a glorious, poetic, oh, their culture is noble kind of way. No, in a spiteful, insomniac, dig a tunnel just to blow up your horses kind of way. You camp near a rice paddy that smells like victory rot, burnt earth and moss, and the ghost of a pig roasts someone abandoned mid-ambush. Behind you, Korean peasants have vanished into the hills. Again, always the hills. The terrain is one enormous conspiracy against you. Deep valleys, cliffs with switchbacks narrower than your stirrups, rice paddies that suck your boots straight off your feet, rain that turns your arrows to soup. You fought in snow, you fought in jungle. But this is something else. It's like the land itself is resenting your empire. And the Koreans, they've stopped trying to meet you in open battle. Now it's ambushes, traps, poisoned wells. A monk once tried to blind you with hot oil disguised as tea. You miss simple war. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The Mongol invasions of Korea began in 1231 and dragged on for nearly 30 years. Despite superior cavalry and repeated sackings, the Mongols struggled to subdue Goryeo, which used guerrilla tactics and exploited its mountainous terrain. There's this island, Ganghwa, tiny, cold, covered in pine trees, monastic retreats, and apparently the entire royal court of Korea. You've marched into Kaesong? Great. The king and his officials packed up weeks ago and relocated to Ganghwa. And guess what Mongols aren't good at? Naval invasions. There's a scholarly debate about why exactly the Mongols never quite mastered ocean warfare. Some say it was cultural. Steppe nomads simply didn't build fleets. Others argue it was logistical. Maintaining supply chains across hostile seas is hard. And some think it was pride. Why learn boats when horses got you from China to Vienna? Whatever the reason, Ganghwa becomes the mosquito in the Mongol Empire's soup. You try everything: blockades, fire ships, spies. You even send a politely terrifying letter to the king, dictated, of course, by your commander, a man whose sword has never known peace. The king replies with a note that's basically a haiku of no. So you burn more villages, behead a few governors, turn temples into stables, and still, the resistance keeps sprouting like bamboo through ash. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 1254, Mongol troops kidnapped 200,000 Koreans, a staggering number, and relocated many of them to Mongolia. Among these were craftsmen, musicians, and women trained in court etiquette. Some of their descendants later served in the Yuan dynasty's court. You meet one of them years later, a singer in the palace of Kublai Khan, who sings lullabies in Korean, wears Mongolian earrings, and confesses in a whisper that she sometimes dreams of Ganghua's pine trees. You don't know what to say. You learn to respect Goryeo resilience. Hate it, sure, but respect it. The nobility splits. Some urge peace. Others scream for continued defiance. It's not like the Korean king is safe and heroic up on his island throne. His court is plagued with factionalism, corruption, and backstabbing monks. But he's still king, and he's still defying the greatest war machine the world has ever seen. That takes guts. Or delusion. Possibly both. It's the winter of your 10th year here, when you finally see a change. A royal envoy rides out to your camp beneath a white flag. He's shivering before he even opens his mouth. His message is short. They're ready to submit, but not quite surrender. In a compromise that would make your childhood self spit into the fire, the Mongols agree to let the Korean royal family retain its throne as long as it becomes a vassal to the Mongol Empire. The crown prince will be sent to Karakoram as a hostage. Taxes will be paid. Troops will be sent. And in return, the Mongols stop burning everything. You exhale, not quite relief, but something close. You ride out with a caravan to escort the prince to Mongolia. He's a boy, nervous, quiet, dressed in silk robes, stitched with mountain symbols. You watch him touch the hem of his cloak to the earth before leaving his homeland. The journey north is long. You're attacked once by Korean rebels, still refusing to recognize the treaty. It's over and not over. Years later, you'll serve in China and hear of the Yuan dynasty established by Kublai Khan, and you'll see Korean courtiers walking the halls, some proud, some ashamed, most quietly enduring. The Koreans kept their dynasty alive, and the Mongols, well, they learned what it meant to bend without breaking someone. The tent is swaying gently in the wind, casting flickering shadows from a lantern that smells faintly of goat tallow. Outside, the vast steppe breathes cold across a plain so wide you feel like you might fall off the world if you stare too long at the horizon. But you're not alone. You're somewhere between Karakoram and Khanbalik, or maybe closer to Samarkand, or possibly all of the above. Because here's the thing, you're in the heart of the Mongol Empire, and the Empire has no heart. No single one, anyway. There's no permanent capital to march toward, no shining seat of government crowned in marble or wrapped in gold leaf. The Mongol Empire lives everywhere and nowhere at once, a rolling beast made of saddles and felt, jurs and gossip. It rules from horseback. It legislates beside campfires. It holds court in yurts that can be disassembled before breakfast. And still, somehow, it functions better than most sedentary empires ever did. You sit beside a ledger keeper. He's carving census details into a wooden tablet with a blade so sharp it slices through butter like mist. He doesn't look up when he speaks. We'll be in Karakoram in 2 weeks, maybe, unless His Excellency decides to winter elsewhere. You suppress a groan. You just got new boots. Let's anchor ourselves in the mainstream fact. The Mongol Empire never settled on a fixed capital during its early decades. Even after the construction of Karakoram in the 1230s, the true power center of the empire was wherever the Khagan and his mobile court happened to be camped. You've heard whispers of plans, grand cities, carved roads, stone walls. But the Khans always seem more at home under canvas. The imperial court is a moving circus of administrators, astrologers, translators, wives, judges, falconers, and a guy who swears he can predict rain by sniffing horse dung. You've learned not to ask, and you're part of it now. Every morning, you pack your belongings into a gear. Those round felt tents Mongols can pitch in under an hour and collapse in half that. You ride beside the foreign clerks brought in from Persia, China, Georgia, even Baghdad. Your orders are written in 6 languages, read aloud in 3, and then shouted in another, just for good measure. Want to submit a request to your commander? Good luck finding him. He's probably playing Polo Tree Valleys over with a Tibetan monk and a Tuvan throat singer. But somehow, the system works. Couriers find you. Supplies arrive. Justice is served. Swiftly and without appeal. Too swiftly. Sometimes, you get the creeping suspicion that this entire empire runs on momentum, not structure. Here's your quirky tidbit. Instead of building a traditional throne room, Genghis Khan's successors held court in enormous felt tents called ordu, which could accommodate thousands of people and were carried on giant-wheeled carts pulled by oxen. One of the carts is parked near you now, 50 feet long, groaning under the weight of carpets, bronze bowls, silk banners, and 6 entire chefs. You once watched a trial held inside one. The accused was found guilty of stealing imperial sheep. Sentence? Death by being sewn into a raw horsehide and left in the sun until he disagreed with the climate. Justice, Mongol style. And now, a scholarly debate you've heard whispered around the fire. Did the lack of a fixed capital weaken the Mongol Empire's cohesion in the long term? Or was it the very source of their early dominance? Some historians claim this mobility prevented corruption and centralized decay. Others argue it left a vacuum that successors couldn't fill when the original Khans were gone. You don't have an answer. You're too busy hauling a census tablet across 500 miles of goat-riddled grassland, Karakoram finally rises out of the hills, not with glittering towers or domes, but with confidence. It's a modest city, all things considered. Mud walls, low timber buildings, a Buddhist temple near a Nestorian church, near a Mongol shaman's yurt, and everyone pretending that contradiction isn't awkward. You walk through the market where Persian silk traders argue with Chinese bureaucrats over translation rates. A German blacksmith, yes, German, hammers out a saddle girth. A Russian boy sells salted fish in Turkish. The empire isn't just multilingual, it's multi-cosmic. But Karakoram, for all its curious bustle, is just one gear in a machine stretched from the Danube to the Yellow Sea. The real engine still rides, still migrates, still breathes cold across the plain. One night, you share tea with a Syrian clerk named Yusuf. He rolls a prayer bead between his fingers and asks you, where does an empire like this end? You say nothing. You think of your commander's tent last week, pitched outside Samarkand, of a war council held on a frozen lake, of an imperial edict delivered via eagle to a fortress in Armenia, of the princess who ruled a town from horseback for 6 months before the governor returned. Where does it end? It doesn't. It spreads like frost on stone. And still, something nags at you. You feel it when you watch the bureaucracy strain under its own weight. When a courier takes 3 weeks to reach a general who's only 400 miles away. When rival princes begin interpreting orders however suits them best. There's no capital, so there's no anchor. And one day, that might matter. But tonight, the empire still breathes, and it sleeps in tents, just like you. The air is thick with jasmine, sweat, and something else. Smoke, maybe, or spice. You're riding through Bengal now, past temples carved with gods who stare like they know exactly what you did last night. Monkeys screech from mango trees, and the earth beneath your horse's hooves is so rich, it squishes like cake. You've never seen green like this. Everything here pulses with life. The rivers braid through the land like a dancer's scarf, swollen with monsoon memory. There are snakes in the thatch, gold in the dust, and thunder in the distance. But it's not the sky, it's drums. They start faintly, a dull boom, like a heartbeat too big for its chest. Then another, then 100, layered like waves, rolling up from the Ganges basin like a sonic tide. You're not sure who's beating them, your army, their army, or the jungle itself. Because here in India, the Mongol tide meets resistance like it's never seen before. You're part of a vanguard unit skirting the outer defenses of the Delhi Sultanate. It's 1299, and this isn't Genghis's army anymore. It's his grandson's. Dua, the Chagatai Khan, has sent his trusted general Kutluk Khwaja across the Indus with an enormous force. And your unit's orders are simple. Break the back of Hindustan. No big deal. Let's hit the mainstream fact early. The Mongols launched at least 6 major invasions into the Indian subcontinent between the 1220s and the early 1300s. And while they repeatedly carved through Punjab like it owed them money, they never fully conquered the heart of India. And that is a little embarrassing for an army that steamrolled the Abbasid Caliphate and took China for lunch. Delhi becomes a frustrating itch they just can't scratch. Your unit rides past burnt fields, villagers long gone, forts evacuated. The locals have learned to vanish before the thunder arrives. But when you finally reach the outer gates of Delhi, you see something you didn't expect. Resistance, hard, professional, organized resistance. Sultan Alauddin Khalji isn't some soft princeling with a wine cup and a lute. He's brutal, paranoid, and smart. Exactly the kind of man who doesn't panic when 100,000 Mongols appear on his doorstep. The Delhi army meets you in the open fields of Kili. The battlefield is blistering hot, and your armor cooks your ribs like lamb skewers. Crows circle already, eager investors in the real estate of death. The Sultan's forces are vast, elephant corps glinting in the sun, archers in scarlet turbans, infantry shoulder to shoulder like scales on a dragon. Your side, well, you're Mongols. You fight like water fights, slipping, swirling, choking, impossible to pin down. You push hard on the right flank. The Delhi lines bend, but don't break. And then the elephants charge. They come screaming, actual screams, from beneath gold-stitched armor, with towers strapped to their backs, and drivers stabbing their necks to keep them moving. You've never fought beasts like this. Some of your horses panic. Some of your comrades freeze. You notch 3 arrows, fire 2, and pray with the 3rd. And now, a quirky detail. During one of the Mongol invasions, the Delhi defenders allegedly deployed war rockets. Yes, literal rockets, launched from bamboo tubes filled with gunpowder. They probably weren't super accurate, but imagine the terror of hearing fire whistle out of a stick when you've only just figured out metal stirrups. It's unclear if those were used at Kili, but you do see flashes from the walls later. Screams follow. Despite the chaos, your forces hold the field for a day. But Khwaja decides not to press the siege. His scouts report reinforcements arriving from the south. And frankly, the Sultan's defenses are too good. So you retreat, not defeated, but definitely not victorious. The jungle swallows you back like a damp mouth. There's a historical debate still swirling around campfires and textbooks alike. Why couldn't the Mongols conquer India the way they did China or Persia? Some scholars blame the climate. It destroys their supply chains and kills their horses. Others point to political unity under tough rulers like Alauddin Khalji. And some argue it's just bad luck. You have your own theory. India simply refuses to be eaten. Back in camp, you wipe leeches from your ankle and listen to stories. One of your comrades swears he saw a Delhi soldier drink from a decapitated skull. Another claims the Sultan's treasury is guarded by demons. A third just coughs blood and sleeps with his eyes open. You've been in campaigns across the steppe, Persia, even Korea. But nothing rattles the bones like India. It's not just the heat, or the elephants, or the diseases with names you can't pronounce. It's the sense that here, for once, your army might not be the scariest thing in the valley. The retreat is long and sour. Morale dips. Supplies rot. You lose 2 more to fever, and 1 to a tiger. You didn't see that one coming. Neither did he. And even though you know this isn't the last invasion, you'll be back, or someone will. The truth itches under your armor, like a rash. The Ganges isn't conquered. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But you'll remember the drums. Always. The sky is ash gray and windless, as if even the heavens are holding their breath. Your horse snorts beneath you, nostrils steaming in the chill of a steppe morning, and you can feel the tension in the reins, not fear. Your mount has seen worse, but unease, that kind of quiet that doesn't last. You're not preparing to fight outsiders today. You're preparing to fight your own. It starts with a whisper. They always do. Whispers that Kublai Khan isn't truly Mongol anymore. That the empire has gotten too fat, too silk-wrapped, too fond of Chinese customs and Confucian scholars. That the old spirit, the fire of Genghis, the blood honor of the steppe, has been lost in a haze of tea ceremonies and bureaucrats with dainty sleeves. And you've heard them say, under breath or behind tent flaps, maybe the wrong brother sat the throne. Let's rewind real quick. When Mongol Khan dies in 1259, while laying siege to a Song stronghold no less, the whole upper tier of Mongol leadership fractures like an overstretched bow. His death sets off a succession crisis so severe, it almost tears the empire apart in 1 generation. You've got Arik Boke, the youngest son of Tolui, the steppe candidate, proudly traditional, loyal to Mongol customs, supported by the core heartland in Karakoram. Kublai, Mongka's older brother, with his polished manners, Chinese advisors, and capital at Shangdu. Yes, that Xanadu. Both declare themselves Great Khan at the same time. In different places, yeah, that goes well. You ride for Arik Boka, not because you dislike Kublai personally. Truth be told, he's smart, even charming when he wants to be. But because something about watching Mongol nobles drinking rice wine out of porcelain jars under hanging silk banners feels off. You didn't swear loyalty to an emperor in a palace. You swore it to the bloodline of the wolf, to the wind, to the law of Yasa, and the thundering hooves of your ancestors. Arik's camp is classic Mongol. No frills, lots of meat, fewer scribes, but even you can see the cracks. Kublai controls the south. More fertile land, more taxes, more rice, more population. His armies are better fed, better paid, and, some whisper, better dressed, which feels like a personal insult. You've got loyalty, and loyalty, as you're about to find out, doesn't always feed a campaign. The mainstream fact, This wasn't some quiet political spat behind a tent flap. The Toluid Civil War, 1260-1264, was a full-on bloodbath, stretching across Mongolia, northern China, and Central Asia. It disrupted trade, splintered alliances, and weakened the unity of an empire that had once felt unstoppable. This isn't just a sibling squabble. This is the beginning of the end. You're in Altai, flanking a caravan route, when word arrives. Kublai's troops have seized Karakorum, the ancestral capital. Your men howl with fury. Arak fumes, and someone smashes a wine jar with a boot, unclear whether from anger or thirst. Still, he rallies his forces, and over the next 4 years, you fight Mongol versus Mongol, horse versus horse, brother versus brother. There are no cowards on either side, just conviction, and that makes it worse. Here's your quirky tidbit. Both sides used nearly identical tactics, weapons, even battle cries. In one engagement near the Khingan Mountains, units reportedly had to tie strips of different colored cloth to their horses' tails just to tell friend from foe during the charge. That's how close the bloodline ran. You remember one battle where you found your cousin among the dead. You hadn't known he rode for Kublai. You buried him in silence, then stole his boots. He would have understood. Arik's forces begin to wear thin, not just from combat, famine. His territory lacks the fertile riverlands of the south. Horses die, wagons stall, warriors go to sleep with flat stomachs and dry mouths. Meanwhile, Kublai enjoys Chinese logistics, millet, rice, supply lines humming like bees. And then there's the betrayal, one of Arak's most trusted general's defects, bringing a whole regiment with him. You don't blame him exactly. Everyone's tired, but you still spit when you hear his name. By 1264, the war is effectively over. Arik surrenders. It isn't dramatic. No battle to end it. Just a quiet acceptance. He rides to Kublai's court and kneels. Kublai lets him live. For now, you and what's left of your brothers wander north, dispossessed and sour. Some go home to herding. Others join mercenary companies along the Silk Road. A few never stop fighting, drifting from rebellion to rebellion, like embers refusing to die. And historians still argue whether Arik ever had a real chance. Some say he could have won if the Central Asian nobles had committed sooner. Others believe Kublai's vision of a Sinicized empire was always going to triumph. You think? It doesn't matter. The damage is done. After the war, the Mongol Empire will still exist on maps, still frighten people, still launch campaigns, and build cities, and enforce laws with terrifying efficiency. But the soul, that sense of shared thunder, has fractured. Kublai becomes Great Khan, but he also becomes Emperor of China, founding the Yuan dynasty. He rules from Beijing, not Karakorum. He dresses in dragon robes and writes poetry in classical Chinese. Meanwhile, The other Khanates, the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate, and Chagatai start doing their own thing. The age of unity is gone. One night, you sit alone by a fire, chewing dried mutton and watching your sword rust. You dream of the first days, the rush of conquest, the purity of purpose, the way the whole world seemed breakable beneath hooves. You wake with dirt in your mouth and a dull ache in your knees. This is what it's come to, not defeat, not quite victory, just drift and the cold saddle beneath you. You're standing in the middle of Dadu, what will one day be called Beijing, and you don't recognize this world anymore. Stone towers, tiled rooftops, gliding palanquins, lacquered gates painted in vermilion and gold. Silk rustles like leaves in the wind, and somewhere nearby, a cedar sings to the moon. The scent of steamed fish and jasmine rice floats above the canals. Everyone bows more than they speak, and yet, the Khan sits at the top. This isn't your grandfather's Mongol empire. This is Kublai's China, a shimmering hybrid colossus stitched together with power, paperwork, and borrowed traditions. And for you, and many of the old guard, it feels like someone took Genghis's dream, dunked it in soy sauce, and hung it from a Confucian proverb. The year is somewhere around 1271, and you've arrived just in time to witness a name change. Kublai, confident now, his rivals crushed or co-opted, announces the birth of a new dynasty. The Yuan? It means origin, a cosmic, philosophical sort of word, pulled straight from the Chinese Book of Changes. Gone is the illusion that the Mongol Khaganate is one and indivisible. Now, it's something else. Something imperial. Mainstream historical fact. Kublai Khan officially declared the Yuan dynasty in 1271, marking a break from the traditional Mongol way of governance. Though he still styled himself as Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. In practice, his realm was now centered on China, governed like a Chinese dynasty. He moves the capital from Karakoram to Dadu, builds grand palaces with glazed tiles, and surrounds himself with ministers who speak in rhymed couplets and make decisions by comparing ancient commentaries. You, of course, hate it, not because you don't enjoy warm baths and predictable harvests, but because it feels like a betrayal of the entire Mongol ethos. You were raised to believe conquest is earned on horseback, with blood and precision and a clear sense of honor, not filigree bureaucrats quoting poetry over lunch breaks. You've even heard whispers of a terrifying thing called the Imperial Examination, a test to determine someone's worth. Where's the part about archery and loyalty? Kublai's palace is a wonder. Latticed corridors, domed halls, artificial lakes, stocked with rare fish. But you walk the stone tiles in your dusty boots, feeling like a steppe wolf in a scholar's study. You still remember yurts, the smell of mutton on pine fires, the cold sweep of grasslands where a man could look from horizon to horizon and see no walls. Now, walls are everywhere. Still, Kublai isn't soft. Not truly. He hasn't forgotten conquest, even as he settles into his silk robes. He keeps his armies sharp. His gaze is southward. The Song dynasty is still holding out in pockets of resistance, mostly in the humid, river-choked lowlands of southern China. For years, Mongol forces, now padded with Chinese and foreign units, slowly chip away at the song, absorbing city after city. And finally, in 1279, the last Song emperor, a child, is carried into battle in the arms of his minister. As defeat looms, the minister wraps the boy in his arms and jumps off a cliff into the sea. You don't know whether to admire the loyalty or question the logic. Historians still argue about whether the Yuan conquest of southern China was inevitable or overextended. Some say Kublai's use of hybridized forces made victory possible. Others argue the resistance would have lasted longer if the Song elite hadn't collapsed from within. Either way, China is his now. So, what's it like to be a Mongol in a world where your own emperor drinks from porcelain teacups and holds court under dragons? Unsettling. For the old guard, there's a deep identity crisis brewing. Some Mongols adapt, marry Chinese wives, learn the language, take government posts. Others retreat to the north, brooding over what was lost. A few ride off westward, hoping the Khanates in Persia or the steppes will feel more Mongol. You hang around, half in, half out, long enough to see something strange. Here's your quirky tidbit. The Mongol aristocracy, feeling awkward about all the Chinese ritual stuff, began holding lavish drinking competitions to assert their authenticity. These weren't casual toasts. These were multi-day alcohol marathons with vomiting pits dug into palace gardens. One record claims a courtier drank himself unconscious 12 days in a row and was given a medal. That's one way to rebel. But don't get the idea that all is well in paradise. Despite the wealth and power, the Yuan state begins to wobble almost immediately. Why? Because governing China isn't easy. It's not a herd of goats or a string of outposts. It's a complex web of rice taxes, irrigation channels, Confucian expectations, Taoist mysticism, and extremely picky palace eunuchs. Kublai tries to balance Mongol supremacy with Chinese customs. He divides society into tiers. Mongols, top. Semuran, Central Asians, Persians, foreigners. Hanren, Northern Chinese, who submitted early. Nanren, Southern Chinese, seen as latecomers. Guess how the locals feel about this? Yeah, they hate it. Tensions rise, famine in the countryside, tax collectors growing crueler, droughts blamed on Mongol sacrilege, bandits reborn as revolutionaries, and worse, Kublai's court starts to rot with internal rivalries, scheming wives, corrupt ministers, pampered sons. He's getting old too, and tired. Sometimes you glimpse him walking the gardens in twilight, leaning on a cane, talking softly to himself in Mongolian. The court pretends not to notice. But you do. This man, who once broke empires, now stares at koi fish like they might give him answers. He mourns his wife, his son, his youth. His legs ache. His army commanders argue. his treasury groans, and the fire of Genghis, once roaring, now flickers in a gilded cage. He asks you one evening if you still believe in the great dream. You tell him, "I believe in what we rode for." He nods but says nothing. By 1294, Kublai Khan dies. Not in battle, not in glory, in bed, in his palace, far from the steppe wind. His funeral is magnificent. Officials bow so low, they scrape their foreheads raw. Bells toll for hours. Paper effigies of horses, camels, and yurts are burned to send with him into the afterlife. And you wonder, watching the flames, if the man who ruled the largest contiguous empire in history truly felt satisfied at the end. Because here's the truth. This is no longer the empire of Genghis Khan. This is something else entirely. Bigger in wealth, smaller in soul. More buildings, fewer bonds. More cities, fewer tribes. You don't hate it, not really, but you miss what was. You still hear hooves in your dreams. There's something eerie about seeing a Mongol banner waving in a place no one can pronounce. The horses are still fast, the bows still bite, and the drums still thunder. But the world has shifted underneath your boots. You're camped somewhere in Eastern Europe, watching your comrades roast a pig they definitely did not buy. And you're starting to realize you're farther from the empire than the empire is from you. This is what it means to outrun an idea. The timeline gets messy here. After Kublai's death in 1294, the empire doesn't shatter overnight. It splinters slowly, like ice underfoot. No dramatic crack, just soft, spreading fractures that only become visible when the horse lords stop recognizing each other's messengers. The Mongol Empire, once one thunderous entity, stretching from the Yellow Sea to the Danube, has now morphed into a patchwork of rival khanates. The Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan dynasty clinging to China. They're like siblings who all inherited different rooms in a giant ancestral yurt and promptly started locking the doors. But the army? The army doesn't care about borders. You're part of a mobile monster that still believes in the old ways. Ride fast, strike hard, and never stay anywhere long enough to learn the local language. You fought in Burma, in Java, in Hungary, in the swamps of Poland, in the frozen rivers of Moscow. You've stared down elephants, crossbows, German plate armor, and tropical disease. No one told you the empire had limits, so you keep riding. Mainstream fact. Even as the political unity of the Mongol Empire collapsed after the 1290s, Mongol military campaigns continued across vast regions. The armies operated semi-independently, and in some cases were led by warlords who no longer took orders from any centralized khagan. In 1327, Golden Horde forces burned Tver in Russia. In 1335, the Ilkhanate was still crushing revolts in Persia. In 1359, UN soldiers tried and failed to put down the Red Turban Rebellion in China, and Mongol-descended warriors would fight under various banners, some imperial, some mercenary, for another 100 years. And yet, something's off. Your generals argue more now. The supply lines are shakier. The locals are less awed, more furious. You notice it most in the horses, still strong, but the new ones lack that spark in the eye. They've grown soft on rice husks and city water. Once, the Mongol army moved as one, a thundercloud with purpose. Now, you're a bunch of storm fragments. One band under a Khan's cousin, another under his rival. Some ride with no banner at all, just old loyalties and old stories stitched into their saddlebags. And the enemies have learned. Europe, for one, no longer cowers at the mention of the Mongol name. They've built walls, learned to counter ambushes, trained crossbowmen to target the second wave instead of the first. Some even hire former Mongols to teach them tactics. It's humiliating. You hear tales of German knights painting Mongol skulls on their shields, not in fear, but as trophies. Still, your army fights, out of habit maybe, or pride. But back in China, the bureaucracy is choking on its own paperwork. Rebellions spark and sputter. The taxes aren't arriving on time. Famines ripple across the countryside. The UN court becomes a hive of eunuchs, whispers, and ghostly court rituals with no warriors present. There's a saying among the horsemen now: the Khan sits on a throne, but the empire rides without him. It stings. Here's a quirky fact. One Mongol general in Central Asia, frustrated that none of the other Khanates respected his authority, built a mobile court made of yurts strapped to elephant-drawn wagons and tried to declare his own Khanate on wheels. It worked for 3 months until a rival poisoned his fermented mare's milk. So what happens when an army keeps riding, but the state behind it has stopped breathing? You see it everywhere. Garrisons that don't get paid. Horses sold to merchants for quick silver. Commanders marrying local noblewomen and going native. Bannerless troops becoming mercenaries for Muslim sultans, Hindu rajas, even Italian city-states. It's as if the empire, like a rider thrown from his horse, keeps stumbling forward out of sheer momentum. Some scholars debate what this means. The historical debate: was the post-Kublai Mongol fragmentation a failure of leadership or a natural evolution? Some historians argue the empire couldn't sustain itself across such distances, cultures, and economies. It was never meant to last, they say, only to burn brightly. Others insist that strong leadership, another Genghis, or a wiser Kublai, might have held the web together longer, perhaps even unifying Eurasia permanently. But you don't have time for debates. You've got a bow to string. One winter, deep in the Carpathians, your squad encounters a village that's heard of Genghis, but calls him a demon. They offer you food, then cross themselves and scatter. No one fights back anymore. They just endure. That's the worst part. Not the resistance, the quiet acceptance. You know in your heart that the age of conquest is ending. Not with a bang, not even a final charge, but with a slow, snow-covered silence. And yet you keep riding, because what else can you do? The empire you swore to is now a memory with borders. But the army is still out there, somewhere. The wind cuts across the steppe with that same old whisper it's had for centuries. No thundering hooves, no smoke on the horizon. Just you, alone on a ridge somewhere in Mongolia, staring at an endless stretch of golden grassland. The kind of silence that could swallow a whole army. And once did. You followed the trail of blood, banners, and broken kingdoms. You've marched from Karakorum to Kiev, ridden beneath desert moons and Polish snowdrifts, seen elephants fall to arrows, and popes bow to ghost messengers. And now you're here, at the edge of history. The Mongol Empire is gone. Not in an official, tidy end of a dynasty kind of way, but in the real sense. Gone like footsteps in dust. Gone like campfire smoke at dawn. But it left something behind, didn't it? A hoofprint, not just in territory, not just in bones beneath ruined walls, but in how the world moved after. Trade, war, migration, myth. The entire 14th century and much of the world that came after it danced to rhythms laid down by horsemen in leather boots and silk sashes. The Mongols didn't just conquer land, they reprogrammed it. Think of the things you can thank them for. The Silk Road, reborn under their protection, spreading paper money, gunpowder, and Black Death alike. A postal relay system that inspired everything from the Russian yam to the American Pony Express. The mixing of Persian astronomy, Chinese printing, and Islamic medicine under one multilingual roof. The rise of Moscow as a future empire, forged in the fires of Mongol taxation. The early blueprint for total war, mobile warfare, psychological ops, and battlefield intelligence, all practiced centuries before NATO wrote it down. The modern world got a jump start from these tent-dwelling war nerds. Mainstream fact: the Mongol Empire, at its height, was the largest contiguous land empire in human history, stretching over 24 million square kilometers, roughly 16% of the Earth's land area. It connected more people, languages, and economies than any other force before the modern era. Even in retreat, its shadow lingered. The Ottomans, the Mughals, the Yuan, even the Ming all took something from Mongol playbooks. Modern logistics owes a nod to their horse relay systems. Modern warfare, you can trace blitzkrieg and decentralized tactics back to Mongol columns flowing around cities like water. Globalization, Mongols did it before it was cool, with less Wi-Fi but more arrows. And yet, historians still argue, was it worth it? Some say the death toll was unthinkable, the cruelty unmatched, cities erased, entire cultures crushed. Others point to the cross-pollination of civilizations, a fusion of East and West sparked by blood, but producing wonder. Music, science, food, religion, all thrown into a planetary pot and stirred by horsemen. Was the Mongol Empire a tragedy? A necessary evil? A brilliant, brutal accident? They debate it still, and maybe that's the final Mongol victory. To be remembered vividly enough to still divide classrooms and coffee shops. Here's a quirky detail to leave you with. In Mongolia today, they still sing epic poems about Genghis Khan, some lasting 30 hours, passed down from throat singer to throat singer, complete with battle sounds, jokes, and emotional breakdowns. There are statues, yes, but the real memory lives in rhythm, rhyme, and reverence. They call him Genghis Khan, not a warlord, but a father. In a strange way, he never left. And neither did you, really, even after the arrows snapped, and the horses died, and the cities rebelled, and the Khans forgot who their uncles were. You kept riding, across time, across memory, across bedtime stories, like this one. You, dear rider, are history's echo. So, if you ever wake up in the middle of the night and hear wind against your window, don't be alarmed. That's just the steppe calling. It always does. Soft and endless. And somewhere, far off, a hoofbeat still echoes. Sweet dreams.